So if so welcome everybody, and if you don't mind, if we could just get one or two people at the very least to turn on your video. If you don't mind, you can switch it off and on. It's just nice to have a face to look at when we're talking. We can look at each other, but it's often nice to know somebody's actually there. Appreciate that so much, Alex. We actually really do. Jeff's going to get started, and what we're going to do is Jeff will go for a little while on a specific topic, and then I'm going to go on another topic, and we'll kind of go back and forth just to break it up a bit so you guys don't hear just one monotonous voice for 3 hours. We will talk over each other occasionally because Jeff knows things I don't know. I know things he may not know, and we'll just kind of add it in as we go. You guys are welcome to ask questions as you go, so unmute yourself, just say I have a question, and then we'll get to your question. We are also going to give you guys several moments at the end of each segment to ask questions. So Jeff and I will switch our shared screen, and that will be a time where you're more than welcome to ask questions about the segment that we just talked about or any previous segment. Just hold your questions about the field till the very end because we'll get to that at the very end. So we're going to start off by having Jeff give us a good presentation on identification, sexual characteristics, and kind of the sympatric species that you might see. So we'll let Jeff get started here.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending. Thank you, Jeff. And Jeff Alvarez is being very humble because he knows a lot more than I know. But I want to start you off with some basic ID on, or basic knowledge of the frog that we're looking at today. First of all, notice the screen that's in front of you. Notice some of the characters that you see. Take it in. A few things, just overall color, overall size, those sorts of things. Because I'm going to take you through a series of slides that are going to be very different from this, but I want you to see if you can see any kind of commonalities between all these slides. Again, Jeff said, and he's right, we're going to throw a lot of information at you in this lecture. We're going to reinforce a lot of it in the field, but remember, this is an introductory course. There's a lot to know, and don't beat yourselves up if you don't remember every detail.
Jeff, can you switch your mode into slide view?
Yes, I probably can.
You're almost there. Over there.
There we go.
Thank you.
Good. That'll help for control too, right?
Yeah.
Next slide. There we go. Okay. What you see before you is a kaleidoscope of frogs, but they're all the same frog. So these are all California red-legged frogs. And one of the things that you look for, the thing that you look for first is the dorsolateral fold. So that's that thing that looks like piping, and it runs from in front of the eye all the way down to the hind leg. And that's important when you're going up against other rhonids in California, which there aren't very many, but there are some that you're going to encounter probably at the same time that you encounter this one. So first and foremost, dorsolateral fold. Look for the dorsolateral fold. Another thing that you may confuse this frog with a larger introduced frog, the bullfrog, but there's going to be a big difference in the tympanum. So the tympanum is the ear-like structure right behind the eye. It's pretty small and inconspicuous in the red-legged frog. The next thing is, and we're sort of taking these things in a descending order of importance, the mustache or the lipstick line, which is usually present in California red-legged frogs. Not always. You can see the one on the upper left because you don't get the right view. You can't see if it has one, and I can pretty much tell you that it would be hard to see anyway, just because this one has a very different pigmentation, and that mustache line would probably be camouflaged in this pigmentation. But that is one thing you can look for. It's especially prominent in the one on the lower left, which is a newly transitioned Benwarf. But one of the things you have to remember about this frog, or have to know about this frog, is never go by color. So that you look for those landmarks that we gave you in the preceding slides. This is part of the reason. This could be the same frog. I don't actually know if it is, but it could be the same frog. And what it's doing is changing its color using melanophores. It can mobilize this melanin in its skin, in these platelets, and completely change its color in order to control its temperature. Frogs are ectotherms, and so they don't have an internal motor that drives their metabolism. They rely on outside temperature. And so to optimize that temperature, they've adapted this mobilization of melatonin, or sorry, melanin, not melatonin. They don't need to sleep. Melanin. But they can go from the frog on your left to the frog on your right in a matter of minutes. Determining the difference between sex. The one on the left is a female, the one on the right is a male. So you can see that there's a big difference in the hand, but don't just look at the hand, look also at the forearm. If you look at the one on the left, it's like a straight stovepipe. The one on the right is more pyramid-like, and so beefy. If you're from my era, we call those Popeye forearms. But if you're from Jeff's era, then you probably don't get it. But the most important thing to look at when you're handling a frog is to actually make the frog up like this, like you're going to do a high five, and then you look for that nuptial pad. It's not on the bottom like on me. This would be mine. It's on the side over here. It's medial. So that's what the arrow points to in the slide in front of you, and then it's circled here. So that is the nuptial pad. It's not the one on the left with the little protuberances. It's on the medial side of that thumb. Some subtle differences are normally females, they grow to a larger size than males. So obviously it depends on what time you find them in life, but ultimately they reach a larger size. Also, they tend to have a more blunt snout. So the one on the right is a female, one on the left is a male. So some other characters that you can go by are in the female on the upper right, she's got a pretty skinny forearm and the male's got a beefy forearm. So that's that Popeye look that we were describing earlier. And then on the left, and we use this less commonly, it's more common first. The first thing you look for is that nuptial pad. And I would even look for that forearm first before I would look for that hind foot. But in the hind foot on the left-hand side, the webbing that connects the toes in that longest toe, if that webbing reaches the second knuckle, it's a female. If it reaches the first knuckle, which is more distal, then it's a male. And it can do that on either side of the toe. The problem with this is that it's not completely consistent, and probably mostly because that webbing is subjected to a lot of wear and tear just from normal life, subjected to injury just from normal life. And there's probably even some phenotypic variation. We just don't know that for certain. But it's something nice if you're not confident, maybe it's a younger frog and it doesn't have a super well developed nuptial pad if it's a male, then you can check the toe or you can check the forearm. But the first thing to look for always, just like that dorsolateral fold to identify the species, for the sex, you look for that nuptial pad on the medial side of the thumb. And Jeff, do you want me to keep going?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to take you through the life stages of the 5 most common species that you're going to find overlapping the California red-legged frog. And these are all the life stages that we won't see all these, but we'll see a couple of them anyway. But just keep in mind that in the upper right-hand side, you have this adult. It's a nice classic one. You can see the dorsolateral folds very clearly from the hind leg all the way up through the front eye, or sorry, through the eye, not the front eye. And then one of the more difficult stages of all of these frogs to tell one from the other is the larval stage. And this one, it depends upon what size that you encounter them at. So we get egg masses that are on the bottom side of your photograph. We get those in late winter, early spring, and then they hatch out into tadpoles, which are on your lower left. And you can see that there are 2 sizes there of the same species, and then a nice mature one that's sprouting legs in the upper right-hand side. As they get larger, they get easier to identify. And as they get larger, they get easier to tell one from the other species. So with California red-legged frogs, what you're looking for is the spot pattern first on the back. You see that the spots are relatively large. They're not always going to be in this pattern. They vary in pattern, and sometimes they're very sparse. But what the consistency is that the outer edge is very diffuse. It's not a super hard, well-defined line around that circle or around that spot. The other thing is that this gold chain that goes below the eye and down the lateral side is most often prominent in bright gold color, actually, in California red-legged frog. It can be present in other frogs. It's usually not that gold color. It can be more of a buff color or whatever, and it's not as well defined. But this is something, it's sort of that secondary thing that you look for to confirm your suspicion. And then finally, and what we find most important here is where the fin, but let me classify the fin. So if you go to the left, and I hope people can see my cursor, I'm not sure if they can, but this muscular section with these sectioned off pieces that tapers to a tip, that's the tail right there. What's above it and below it, the transparent stuff, or relatively transparent, you can see on the lower left-hand photo actually is clear, is the tail fin. And that fin on the top side goes into the body, it enters the body here, we call that the insertion point. So you can see in the larger red-legged frog above, it's about a third of the way up the body, and it's a little bit more clear in the one that's being held in the palm of, I believe that's Jeff's hand. It's a little more clear how advanced on the body it is. So that's a big difference also to look for between this and other larvae. Now, we'll teach you a different method, or a more conformational method, I would say, a more definitive method in a different class. But here, for what we're doing in this class, this is probably the simplest way to identify this frog. So the next one is the one that's going to be most confused with. But just for clarity, if you don't mind, I'd like to toggle back and forth. Look at the spotting on this one. This is an American bullfrog. Look at the spotting. And then if I go back, look at the spotting on this one. You see how diffuse it is? And these are fine. They're like somebody took a pen tip and just dot, 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 or like a dot matrix printer, if any of you remember what those look like or are like. Now, one difference too, I forgot to cover, and that is that California red-legged frog egg masses are roundish, about the size of a grapefruit when they're freshly laid. American bullfrog is a big, flat, looks like somebody hawked and spit. They're actually quite gross. California red-legged frog has about 5,000 egg masses, somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000, eggs per mass. American bullfrog can have between 20 and 25,000 eggs per egg mass, and they can do it more than once. Red-legged frogs, just once per year that we know of. But bullfrogs, multiple times and massive numbers. So when they're introduced, they're very competitive. Another thing to look at with the bullfrog is, well, first, and I know Jeff will agree with me here, is that a California red-legged frog is beautiful in all aspects. Bullfrogs are ugly. They should just be outlawed, period. They're just ugly. But if you look at them here, you'll see that the fin enters almost at the back of the body, almost at the back of the body. So very different. It's also not as tall, but that's something that you probably have to look at a lot of different animals to before you pick up that difference. These get larger, but California red-legged frogs get almost the same size. So you probably shouldn't go on size by these, or with these guys. The next one you might confuse it with, especially at a certain size, because this is the other native ronid that you're going to see more commonly in California. There are others, but this is the more common one. This is the foothill yellow-legged frog. It's also a ronid. The species is rana. So it lays a very similar egg, but much smaller, much like probably the size of a small orange when they're first laid. Again, can vary quite a bit in color. But at the larval stage, if you notice on the left-hand side, they're dorsoventrally flattened because they're adapted primarily for streams. Now, California red-legged frogs and bullfrogs can use streams, but they're not generally stream adapted. They're in slower streams. These guys are in swifter water, and they can be in slow water too, but they are often in swifter water than the other two. As such, they're dorsally and dorsoventrally flattened. Also, their tail inserts relatively far back on the body, but almost, I mean, it's more forward than the red-legged frog. Now, telling these apart from the adult red-legged frogs, these guys do have a dorsolateral fold, but it's far less prominent. It's actually as prominent as it gets in the adult in the upper right-hand side. More common to see the other two, the reddish colored one, and also this sort of granite colored one. But again, we don't go by color, we go by these field marks. So the field mark for this one is the pale mark between the eyes. It's often triangular, but not always. It's not always there. It's a lot harder to see in this sort of red colored one. But one of the things that is really consistent is the skin is sort of a sandy texture. And then you have this arrangement, and gets more prominent as they get older, of tubercles on the side. These are things that are probably make it more easily identifiable. Also, they do occur in ponds. We found many in ponds, but they're more abundant by far in streams. This one is the easiest one. So this is also probably a better distributed frog. It overlaps the ranges of all the things that we're going to show you. But this one is the easiest larva to tell from the others, because if you look at the position here of the eyes looking straight down on the larva, they're on the lateral, or excuse me, on the margin of the head. So on the outside. If we go back to the others and you look straight down, they're on the inside. So all the way back to the red-legged frog. All of them are on the inside. Sorry, I'm pointing, but you can't see. But these eyes are in, they're not touching the margin of the head. But if I go to this one, they're touching the margin of the head. So looking straight down, they're touching the outside outline of the head. Also, they have the most flamboyant is probably not the right word, but they have the biggest tail fin. It's often brightly colored, and it attaches almost right behind the eye. So it's farthest forward of all the other species. Their egg masses are much smaller, often the size of a walnut or a peanut, and to touch them, they're really like an uncooked egg yolk, really soft. And then finally, I'm going to take you to the other one that's especially at younger ages, when bullfrogs and foothill yellow-legged frogs and California red-legged frogs are all in the same stage of development, and they're all about that big. They're really easy to confuse with this one. Now, with this one, there are a lot of behavioral differences that you'll notice as you get more experience that will help you to determine the difference. But the first and foremost thing is that the tail fin on the western toad, that's what this is far less well developed. It's pretty thin, kind of follows the outline of the tail for the most part. It also starts almost off the body, as you can see in the upper right-hand side. The actual fin part, so the transparent part, starts way back in the body. These ones also they have a behavior. They are the only ones that actually school. They don't do it in every situation, but in the larger water bodies, you'll see them schooling in and out of feeding areas. So that's something that other larvae don't do that we know of. And then the egg masses are strings. They're not clumps, they're actual strings, as you can see on the lower left. There are a few other behavioral things probably be best for us to show you in person if we actually encounter them, although they're early and they don't stay in the ponds long, so it's unlikely that we will. Jeff, do you have anything to add to those, to the toads? Okay, whoops, you're muted.
Didn't want to hear you. Didn't want to just be making all these extra sounds and have you be distracted. No, I don't want to add too much, only because I only want to say that this is a tricky one, like Jeff has been saying, and that many people get this one wrong when you find redleg and toad together. So it's not to say that you don't know your tadpoles. It is just to say, be really careful, because despite the fact that you don't think this is going to be a tough one, it's a tough one.
And I would say too that what I've been telling people lately is, you know, when you tell people you're learning about the frogs and you're being taught about the differences between the tadpoles, don't let people pressure you into identifying them on the spot and judging you based on that, because this is the most difficult stage of the amphibian groups that we're looking at to discern, to tell apart from one from the other. There are developmental stages that are much easier to tell from one from the other, but when they're all about the same size, it's not something that you do speedily, and it's something that you want to do. Take time and look at more than one before you actually make a call. And if you're particularly resourceful, you call somebody who knows better than you do. We do that, so you should do that.
And I would add one thing, and that is that Jeff has probably mentioned this a couple of times about the adults, but you don't want to use color with tadpoles either. Color can shift in the tadpoles, and it changes with age. And color really is irrelevant, but that is one of the things that we often say about Western toad. Oh, it's a little black tadpole, must be toad. But bullfrog comes out black, redleg comes out black, so does yellowleg, so does mountain yellowleg.
Yeah.
Some of the other toads that are in Southern California are all black when they come out. So they all change color as they age and grow. So do not use color for IDing tadpoles or adults.
They also have those same melanophores, so they can darken with temperature. Um, so if anybody hasn't seen a Western toad, though, that's the adult on the upper right-hand side. It has parotid glands right behind the eyes. A little tough to see in this picture, but they're there. And then also the white line uh, down the back. Um, Less developed, how would you say, shorter legs than the frogs. So the toads are definitely tend to be walkers rather than hoppers, although they can hop. Um, and then the warty skin. That's probably the best way to tell it at a glance. And then also, I would just reiterate, yeah, don't go by color. And the other thing is, often people think that it's automatically a tree frog if you flip it over and it's got the swirled intestines. Don't fall for that one either. Jeff, I'm going to hand the screen over to you. Does anyone have any questions?
While Jeff is doing that, I'm just going to hold up my field guide. And in the back of the field guide, there's a little section here that shows mouth parts. If you want to look like you know what you're doing and actually know what you're doing with Tadpole ID, go to the back of the field guide and start learning the mouth parts. There's a page for most of these. Here's one with the mouth parts that we're going to be using. It's in the back of the field guide that nobody looks in. It's the very back that still smells new when you open it up. Just think about looking at it. Even if you don't memorize it, just look at it so you know it's there. It will help you quite a bit with ID. So we're happy to answer questions as I'm shifting over to my presentation. Does anybody have questions for Jeff?
Actually, I have a question for you, Jeff. The field guide you're holding up, what field guide is that?
You know, this is the very old Stebbins from 1984. I still like it. It's right here by my desk. I used the 2003. If you look at my finger, it's right there on my bookshelf. The 2000, I think it's 18 with McGinnis and Stebbins was outdated when it was printed, so I don't use it anymore, even though I'm friends with McGinnis. I'm looking forward to the new field guide that's coming out. That's going to have really good idea for tadpoles as well. That won't be until it was going to be fall 2023. Now it's going to be fall 2024. But if you have to buy a field guide, I'd still buy the Stebbins, but I'd buy the used one that's green, and it's as good as it's going to get for a field guide right now. Yeah, this old one I have is from my college days. So I still have it and it's still in good shape, so I use it. I know the name changes, so I can make that change. And speaking of name changes, I'm going to talk about the boring section of this presentation, the taxonomy and distribution. There's a reason why we want to share some of this stuff, but you know, it's not all, you know, there's not lots of detail that you're going to just completely remember, and I get that piece, but it's still important to share for you guys, so we're going to talk about it. So back in around 1852, the frog was discovered in California by Baird and Gerard. And when it was described, they described one species that was three subspecies. So one subspecies was Humboldt, Siskiyou, Del Norte County. That was considered the northern red-legged frog subspecies. Everything south of that along the coast and most of the Central Valley was the California red-legged frog as a subspecies, and the little number 3 there up in Lassen County was a subspecies called Cascades frog. If we fast forward almost 100 years here, you can see the map on the right is a much more updated map. It's much more refined. So the range of the animal did not constrict, meaning it didn't lose a lot of ground. It just became more refined. So it looks like a very much more narrow area, but it's not that the frog went away. It was just never present where Baird and Gerard originally thought. So now we have, in Stebbins 2003, we've refined the range. So still back up there in Del Norte County and a little portion of Siskiyou County is northern red-legged frog. All the red section in the Sierra foothills and the South Coast Range is California red-legged frog. And then this light blue section is the intergrade zone. So it's the intermediate area where nobody really could tell the difference. I mean, if I went up there, Jeff went up there, we'd be like, pick up a frog and say, well, it's a red-legged frog. We're not saying northern or California red-legged frog at this point. Jeff, I know the chat came up. If you could address those while I'm still talking, that'd be great. So then as I moved along, I'm moving the map that was on the right to the left, so you can still see that one. Because then around 2004, only a year after Stebbins published his field guide, Schaefer published a paper that really focused on the intergrade zone. He really wanted to figure out what that was. And so the new map in 2004 shows northern red-legged frog from Del Norte County all the way down to almost southern Mendocino County, and then everything else is red-legged, California red-legged frog. And I've kicked off Cascades because it's its own species in its own area, and it's almost gone anyway, so it's not relevant to this talk. Now, this is the map I use. This map really still shows the area where foothill yellow, I'm sorry, getting these frogs confused already. Northern red-legged frog is still down North Humboldt in Mendocino County. Red-legged frog is still in the same area, although I've brought my map way up from the south. It's no longer in San Diego, Orange, or Los Angeles counties. And then I put in a little blotch in down here in Baja California, because Jeff and I study that population too, and so it's good to know that it also occurs in Baja California. Now, there was a population in Nevada that we now think is gone. There was also a population in Santa Cruz Island that we now think is gone, but this is generally the map. So the yellow blotches I have here really reflect the idea that we don't do much surveying in these areas. It's a huge amount of private property, and we just don't know what's present and what's not present. So because I'm a little more careful, I want to keep the range in there, but I make it yellow, just saying it's an unknown area. We need to learn more about that area. So very recently, and by that I mean the last 3 years, a population was reintroduced into a historic site in the Santa Rosa Plateau in Orange County. So there's now a population down in Orange County as of 3 years ago. And in the same project, they've moved another population to San Diego County at a private ranch. Both of these populations were actually brought up from the Mexico population. So they've been reintroduced from Mexico. There was a population in Palm Springs, but that's been essentially pilfered and moved to the Orange County population. So that population on the Whitewater River is or should be gone. So one other kind of important point to me was that I recently heard of a population over here near Glynn and Colusa County. Currently it's unconfirmed, meaning personally I haven't gone there to see it, but it's a possibility. The habitat looks good. So just because we have a huge yellow section doesn't mean they're absent from there, just means we're not getting in there enough to look around. So if you're working in any of these yellow sections, if you can let me know if you find anything, I'd really appreciate it. And then keep in mind that there's this big elevational range for this frog. So we know it occurs at Abbott's Lagoon in Point Reyes at 0 elevation. We know that for sure because we take a trip out there for a different workshop for red-legged frog, our advanced level, and we see frogs right there on the shore in the sandy dunes at 0 elevation. Now, if we go a little further and we go toward the east, you can go all the way up to 3,200 feet and find red-legged frogs in El Dorado County and in other places in the Sierra, but this is the highest elevation we find in California. It's at 3,200 feet. This year they experienced snow for about 4 months of the year. Typically it's a couple of weeks a year. So they were hit pretty hard with snow this year. Then if you go down to our site down here in Mexico, there's a population at 6,200 feet. This is essentially the same as Lake Tahoe. So it'd be like finding red-legged frog, California red-legged frog in the Lake Tahoe Basin. But what we would find there, if there were frogs present in the basin itself, would be mountain yellow-legged frog, Sierra Nevada mountain yellow-legged frog. We don't find them in the Tahoe Basin really very commonly anymore, but they're still at that elevation and higher. But certainly in California itself, nothing over 3,200 feet. But in Mexico, they live a tougher life and they can manage just fine there. And then I'm going to focus a little bit, just for a moment or two, on this little intergrade zone. So it went from about, I don't know, maybe 300 kilometers or 400-kilometer intergrade zone now to a really refined area. And I take this right out of Schaefer's paper. So this is one of his figures, Schaefer 2004, and I'll identify what he's got going here because it's a complicated little figure. So in the gray zone in the north, it's northern red-legged frog. In this darker gray zone in the south, it's California red-legged frog. The historic intergrade zone is this hash area. And then the current intergrade zone that Schaefer is proposing is in this little red box, and the red box is expanded here. And he's got a series of little creeks that he has names for, and he knows based on the genetics, because they did genetic testing, which frog we actually have. So the intergrade zone was really contracted down to this little zone here. And what we find is the area is between Big River and Mills Creek in Mendocino County, and it's about 5 kilometers wide instead of about 500 kilometers wide. So within 3 creeks, there's 3 creeks in that little zone, you'll have the entire intergrade zone. And in those 3 creeks, you should be saying, I don't know what I have, unless you're Schaefer. And anybody else should be saying, I don't know what I have, including Jeff and me. But above it, north of Big River, it's northern red-legged frog, and south of Mills Creek, it's California red-legged frog. Now, if you have a project in that little area between those two, the reality is the service is going to expect you to call them all California red-legged frog, because if you can't tell the difference, you got to treat it like the listed species. But people will still go in there and try and differentiate these two, and I assure you, you're not going to be able to do it. If you're doing it and you're getting it right, it's purely luck. So I'm going to be happy to answer questions on range and taxonomy and distribution while Jeff is queuing up for his talk on oviposition and breeding. Does anybody have any questions at all to this point? So it's because I forced mute on everybody. It's not a problem at all for us. We're happy to just keep prattling on here, and you can feel free to ask your questions in the field. Jeff, are you ready?
I think I am.
Great.
Yeah. Am I sharing my screen? I can't tell.
Not with me.
Uh-oh. All right. There we go. Back to Zoom. There we go. Why is it not? Oh, here we go.
Jeff was on Amazon Prime Day a little early.
Yeah, no, so I was actually talking to my stockbroker.
That's even funnier.
Okay, I am sharing my screen. I don't appear to have the correct view though. There we go. Okay, now I believe I'm going.
You're good.
All right. Yes. Okay, breeding behavior on oviposition sites. So breeding behavior starts in late winter. Depends a lot upon weather and stream flow, et cetera. But since they're mostly pond breeders, generally it starts with the first rains. So we've seen them breeding along the coast in as early as November and up to the Sierra as late as April. These dates are really kind of up to the frog. This is just a general span of time that we give you, because it varies year to year and from place to place, and you don't want to give a hard date. They breed in April. That's just not going to work year to year. So a big range. And they can breed in streams as well as ponds. We think of them as pond breeders, and historically they probably were stream breeders, actually, because ponded water is not a common natural feature in California. If you think about it, most of the ponds you visit are stock ponds or other kinds of impoundments that are human created. I can think of large lakes that were there when Europeans invaded, like Clear Lake or Tahoe or other such things. But generally, it was streams. So they probably bred in slower moving streams or in the pools in slower moving streams. On the right, you have Jeff pointing out an egg mass at Los Vaqueros Reservoir in Kellogg Creek. They attached to tules in this case. And on the left-hand side, there are two at the base of the bush that that person on the left is walking past. So this is a slow-moving stream in Mexico. Now, this was an extremely fast-moving stream with the last storm. But as soon as the water quiets down enough that it won't wash away the egg masses, then it's a good time for them to oviposit. I'm actually not quite sure why we have I guess we're just pointing out males that are waiting to breed. That's what the arrows are for. And then on the lower left-hand side, you have a male and a female in amplexus. Amplexus is the hole the male gets on the back and grabs, using those nuptial pads, grabs around behind her hind legs and hangs on. And so once she starts to emit eggs, the male ejects sperm. It's external fertilization, but the female is the one who chooses the site and and when and where the eggs are going to be laid. So this amplexus is an extremely important hold for them. They defend themselves. Other frogs will try to knock them off because, in this case, this male and female are contributing their own genetic material. It's an important thing for them in life. This is what they live for. And so the opportunity to breed with a female, it doesn't come along readily for males, and males usually outnumber females, so there are often fights that ensue. So males grab on for a long time, and oftentimes they're so persistent that they'll leave a scar on the female. Sometimes they get it wrong. So on the upper left, you see a male that's amplexed to a western toad. Now, on the right-hand side, on the upper level, you see a male on a male. When that happens, the male on the bottom gives a release call. And in our field work, we're likely to hear that call because it means, please let me go, please let me go. And that's what, if one species recognizes it from another. When it happens on the left-hand side with the toad and the frog, there's probably no recognition there. So that unfortunate encounter might last quite some time, and it might cause both of them to not reproduce that season. And it might be their only opportunity. So this is not something to be taken lightly. When there's this misdirected amplexus, it can be very costly for whoever's involved. And then we have a really cute example on the lower left. We've actually seen this 4 or 5 times tonight. And this is an old photo where I didn't actually catch the tree frog on the back of the toad, but the tree frog was ready to go. And it had a very, very funny looking amplexus. Looked more like it was being, in a felony stop being searched by the cops. But anyway, but that is what happened. Really hopeful thinking on the part of the male tree frog, sadly. But then on the right, sometimes this drive to breed is so strong that the male will amplex the female on the way to the breeding pond. They'll find each other out in the terrestrial landscape somewhere. He'll grab onto her and stay with her until she breeds or finds a way to throw him off. So, and again, they'll grab on so tightly and for so long that they actually break the skin on the underside of the female with those nuptial pads just from all the continuous rubbing. There we go. So they can breed almost anywhere. And in fact, there's a really brilliant article written by a really smart guy that says that there are more than 40 attachments for the egg masses. So pretty much whatever the female chooses to be a good substrate is what they attach to. So the pond on the upper left is actually, that's the one you're going to visit in the next couple of weeks. And that's the way I found it when I first took the job. It had no submergent vegetation. But frogs were still breeding in there, not in the same numbers they are today, but they were still using it. So even poor habitat is habitat, and it can get better. But just because you see this and you think, well, there's no place for them to anchor their eggs, think again, they'll find a place. Sometimes it's even a dirt clod. Sometimes it's a cow chip. A couple of times I've actually seen road signs that the wind has blown in and they've attached to the roadside. So whatever they decide is a good anchor, that's what they're going to attach to. On the far right is what they were attaching to in the photo on the left. So it was just when the ponds filled up and they inundated the grasslands and the grasslands sent up brand new shoots. This is actually probably ripgut brome. And it's probably only going to survive 2 or 3 weeks, but it was enough for the frogs to attach the egg mass to. On the left-hand side, on the bottom is more typical. These are tules in that same pond that we're going to visit. And you can see them on the right. Sometimes they attach close to the surface, most of the time within a meter of shore, most of the time within a few centimeters of the surface. That's where you're going to see them most of the time. There are exceptions, and that's what I'm showing on the one to the right. This one was actually 30 meters from shore, and it was about a meter down in depth. And you can probably also see that it's got somebody waving at you here. Now and then the egg masses get predated by newts. And so that's a newt right there. And it's really not waving at you. It's probably just trying to grab an egg. But it's kind of cute. Anyway, so most importantly, though, let me just reiterate, usually a meter from shore, usually at a pretty shallow depth. This is a really interesting picture because they don't oviposit all at once. So the breeding season can be over a period of weeks. And so on the bottom, you've got this sort of opaque egg mass, and on the top, a brand new one that was laid about 10 days afterward. But the attachment was really good. They both liked it, so they just attached in the same place. But you can see these are brand spanking new eggs because you see the pale ends on those. Those are the vegetal poles, and within a couple of days, those will disappear. But this is a brand spanking new egg mass. You see how clear, I mean, it looks like they're floating in space because the gelatinous material that they're encapsulated in is so clear. But after a while, just the flotsam and jetsam and probably some algae start to grow on the outside, and the surface is sticky, so it attracts stuff. Then they start to get opaque like the one on the bottom. Oh, this is the same photo, and I'm not quite sure why I'm showing it to you, except that let's go back here. You see how round these eggs are? And I showed you those same vegetal poles. As they age, they sort of change, they start changing shape as they develop. So they go from this round shape, kind of a P shape, to a bean shape, whoops, and then to a C shape. And so these are much more close to hatching, probably just a few days away from starting to hatch. In fact, there might even be some on the outside that have hatched. But this is how you can tell. And also the gelatinous material continues to bring on water, and then it also starts to decay. So that nice tight egg mass that was originally laid starts to stretch apart. And then, oh, well, this is actually to show you that sometimes the frogs don't get it right. And mostly that's because we sort of throw them a curveball in all these impoundments that we make, these reservoirs, etc., because the rain fills them up and then they have a spillover level. So when they're at maximal level, if a frog lays an egg, that pond level keeps draining off down a spillway, and it lowers, and it can lower significantly. Now, in this case, on the upper right-hand side, this is 2021, so the most severe drought record that we had on record, or the one that we recorded. The egg mass on the upper one was laid in about 5 centimeters of water, and about 10 days later, because we didn't get any rain, that was the result. So it was left high and dry, and so that egg mass didn't make it. On the lower left-hand side, this is a reservoir situation, and so the egg mass is laid while the reservoir is at its maximum depth. But then, unfortunately, it goes down, and you can see the dehydration has pulled the egg mass down and left some of those eggs high and dry on the actual tule mass, or a piece of tule. So this is what can happen when they use a reservoir that's artificially either regulated by humans, or because it's not a normal pond, it's got a spillover. And so rain and inflow can make it go over that spillover, but then over the ensuing days, it goes down quickly to the spillover level, and that can leave eggs stranded high and dry. So where to look? The egg mass on the lower left, you can see it's brand new. You see how dark it is and how dense it is. It's probably attached underneath all this flotsam and jetsam. It's probably attached to grasses. And then on the right-hand side is a nice fresh one also, and it's on Eliocharis, otherwise known as spike rush. But both beautiful, and both within a meter of shore. And then in wetlands where it's all just this one big massive distribution, it can same level water, essentially, it can be almost anywhere. But in this case, it's where the sunlight reaches it. You can see that all the tules are laid over. And so sunlight can actually reach those eggs. So that is an important aspect. You're usually not going to find eggs in a big, dense mass of tules, for example. And there are a couple of other examples here. So on the upper left, you're going to find that this tule mat, or mass, I should say, is very controlled by grazing animals, which in this case is really critical because in order for the eggs to get sunlight to develop, they need the heat to develop. They're going to be on the outside of these tules, not on the inside in the deeper water. They're going to be on the outside where the water is more shallow, where the sun can get it, and the water is actually warmer. Same thing is true on the lower right-hand side. They're actually on the edge of the tules, not in the dense part of the tules. But in order to create habitat like that on the lower right-hand side, they put a fence right through the middle of the pond, and you can see that effect. It actually provides quite a lot of nice habitat for laying eggs. This is bad habitat. This is bad habitat because there's no exposed surface area for water. It's got dense tules, and it's covered with azolla, otherwise known as mosquito fern. And basically, this affects things in several ways. But first is that the eggs can't really get any sunlight, and so they would develop slowly in this very cold water in the winter. The other is that even if they did do well, the azolla blocks out sunlight, so it really inhibits the production of algae. And the frog larvae are vegetarian, and they feed on algae. So if there's not very much algae, they don't have anything to eat. And then if they made it to frogs transition into a terrestrial form that are basically mostly insectivorous. So in this case, you're not going to get any kind of a food web, because if there's no algae, then there's nothing to eat the algae and no predators to eat those things eating the algae. So you've really collapsed your food web. So this is terrible habitat.
I'm going to just jump in to say that it doesn't mean there's zero chance of redlegs here. It just means it's not good breeding habitat, because adults can live in the tules and they're very hard to find. And they might even reproduce on occasion, but the tadpoles just don't necessarily live. But we tend not to try to share, like, this is going to be absent of frogs. That you're really rarely going to hear that from Jeff or me, unless it's like a Walmart parking lot. And even then, I would be a little bit concerned about making a very definitive statement. We never say there's zero chance. We just say there's a less likelihood.
Yes, and in fact, there are frogs at this pond.
Yeah.
And frogs breed at this pond. They just don't breed here. They breed up in the far corner where it's open. Okay. Oh, is this still me, Jeff?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So dispersal, this is a really critical thing in frogs. They don't necessarily live year round in the same place that they breed, and they only need water in order to reproduce. Frogs are terrestrial. As adults, they're terrestrial. It's only the larval form that's aquatic. Yes, adults hang out at aquatic sites, but they don't need the water necessarily. They certainly take advantage of it, but they don't need it. They can live in places without standing water. And they do that all the time. But most important thing about dispersal is there are three types that are listed here. Movement to and from the breeding site, which is an annual thing for the most part and quite critical. Movement away from the natal site, so that's dispersal. And one-way movement to a distant location. So there can be dispersal away from the natal site, but they're going to return the next year. So there's high fidelity in some frogs. But obviously, in order for them to spread around, at some point there's a one-way movement to a distant location, taking your genes with you. So expanding the population and also expanding the genetic base. To record that on the Mitsui Ranch, which is where you're going to be for your field trip, over the past 6 years now, off and on, we've had radio telemetry studies. So this allows us to actually track the frogs in real time. So these are radios on the left-hand side. They do not exceed 10% of the frog's body weight. We attach them to adult frogs by a beaded chain around the waist. They give off a constant signal, and we can pick up that signal within about 200 meters of the frog. So here's a nice example. I think the one on the right is in Mexico, I think. Anyway, and then we also put a pit tag in them. So like the tag that you put in your pet called a chip. And we do that so we can identify individuals and track individuals. And that we can track them over time with those over a period of years. These radios last, the biggest ones last about 20 weeks, I believe. And oftentimes we're using smaller ones that last anywhere between 3 weeks or 11 weeks. So they're battery powered. We have to find the frog and then remove them and then send them back to be rebatteried, etc. But on the bottom left-hand side, you see the yellow thing is to read the pit tag, which is actually under the skin on the frog. And they wear those until once we tag them, they carry those for life. Whereas the radios are just for a period of time. And then you locate the frog. This is Professor Dirk Van Vieren locating a frog at Turtle Pond, and he's using a Yagi antenna, which was invented by a Japanese engineer. And basically what it takes is that signal being emitted by the radio periodically, and because it's Y-shaped, it's directional. So you can actually hone in on the direction of the signal, where it's coming from, and that allows you to find the frog. And so this is the result of our first radio telemetry study done by Lisa Serber. And the green dots are bullfrogs. So you can see that at that time we had bullfrogs. We still probably have a few in one pond, but generally they're gone. That's a whole nother class. But the reds are red-legged frogs. And you can see that over 400 meters, they move quite a bit. And they're moving over open land, essentially, at least in this depiction. We've learned a little bit since then, but they move quite a bit. And they'll do this within a very short period of time. I mean, like days. They'll move these 400 meters. And sometimes the whole distance in a day. So adults can move quite a long way. I mean, if you think about that, that's half a kilometer. And so, but the longest recorded movement that we know of, not on our place, but in the coastal area, was 3.6 kilometers. So, and that was an annual migration. That was a breeding migration. So they left the breeding site, and then they returned. We don't know how far they can go for the distant when they're taking their genes with them. Nobody knows that question. Nobody has an answer to that question yet. Hopefully we will before we kick the bucket. But anyway, but this gives you some idea of how far they can move. What's interesting here is that we had very few bullfrogs moving back and forth between the pond, but we had many going up and down the stream and for quite some distance. They were moving more like yellow-legged frogs actually than red-legged frogs, but they're also, like yellow-legged frogs, more obligated to be near water because they can't absorb water in other places as well as red-legged frogs can. Red-legged frogs are remarkable in how terrestrial and dry they can handle it. And then, so when they make these travel distances, how do they do it and where do they go? So the red-legged frog on the left, the tomato-colored one, actually found at Kellogg Creek at Los Vaqueros Reservoir, about 100 meters from the stream that it was probably in, 80 degrees at night. So this is lit by a flashlight, but it was 80 degrees out. The humidity was probably 30%. So how does it do that? We'll talk about that when we're in the field. But most commonly, and this is a tree frog on the right-hand side, they're going to find some way when the sunlight comes up, they're going to find some place to be where they can get good favorable temperature, which is hopefully going to be lower than 80 degrees. And also humidity. They're going to find that oftentimes in a rodent hole. You'd be shocked at how often we find them in rodent holes. And so we don't know a ton. We're learning a lot, and we'll share that with you during the field visits. But what we're learning is that females especially probably don't spend a lot of time at breeding ponds and go elsewhere to provision their egg mass for the next year. And probably where there's less competition, but we can discuss that more also. But the first work we knew about dispersal, the first good definitive work was Alabac, when they noticed that metamorphosed frogs, so the ones that hatched from tadpoles that season, left with the first annual rains. That is a consistency that we have seen over several years, and it can take on different looks, but it is generally true that with the first significant rain, most of the metamorphs leave a pond. And we have to actually have a current study on the ranch on that. And as I spoke of earlier, 400 meters in 3 days or less, and we now know that they can cover most of that distance even in 1 day. And then for us, the maximum known dispersal distance is 1.6 kilometers over 4 months. We actually probably at this point unpublished can beat that pretty easily. Not the distance, but certainly the velocity. They can go that distance in a couple of days. Although metamorphs tend to be a little slower than large adult frogs. And then reiterating that last, the 3.6 kilometers over a month, that was Bulgar et al. And that was down in San Luis Obispo County, I believe, along the coast. And that was an adult, big adult female. Shall I keep going, Jeff?
I think I can take a jump in, give you a bit
Okay.
of a break.
Oh, okay. Either way.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in. So why don't you unshare? Do you have any questions for Jeff about dispersal and movement? Because he definitely knows this stuff and he's the one to ask. So at the very least, one of the takeaways we want you to keep in mind with that is that Bulger had 3.6 kilometers, and that's a pretty good distance. So we think of travel distance more in tiger salamander scale because we always say, oh, it's within this many feet of a pond or meters of a pond or miles of a pond. We have to start thinking the same way with red-legged frogs because they are a pretty terrestrial animal, spend a lot of time in the upland, and Jeff and I will just talk about that over and over and over when we're in the field. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about, I'm going to sort of switch gears here and talk about survey protocols, and decontamination. Seems like, sort of a less than exciting topic to bring up, but you're really going to be required to know some of this stuff, and we want you to know it anyway. So the idea is that I'll share with you what I know, but it often changes as we're moving along here. And by that, I really mean to say Jeff and I are in close connection with the service frequently, not so much the department, but with the service for sure. And they're learning as we're going along learning too. So as we learn, they learn, things start changing, and not everything is going to be static. It's all often going to be dynamic and kind of shift around a bit. But we'll start with the idea of a survey protocol. If you haven't looked at one before, and this is just what we call the level 1 or beginner level red-legged frog workshop, we don't spend a lot of time talking about survey protocols, but that's what consultants are focused on. So you can find the survey protocol inside of, connected to the website of the service. And what you want to do is actually look for the region that you're going to be working in, because there may be regional differences. There turns out there's not with red-legged frog, but there can be with things like kit fox and other species. So you go to their website, you look down the line, you see that they have guidelines for surveys, and I'm pointing out that now. And just as a sort of a point of detail, these are survey guidelines. It's not a survey protocol. The service really sees a huge difference between a protocol and guidelines. So guidance they can develop and offer up and share and tell you this is what you have to do. A protocol has to go through public vetting and comment period, and it's really pretty annoying and frustrating because the public always has something to say that isn't congruent with biological norms. So they generally use guidance because that is a less rigid form. So we do have formal guidance for red-legged frog surveys, and you should look that up. Read that through if you haven't already. If you're doing survey protocols, if you're doing, I'm going to interchange protocol and guidance here, but oops, getting too fat with my fingers. I'm going to interchange protocol and guidelines, survey guidelines. Just don't worry about that piece of it. But this is sort of the method for surveys we're going to talk about. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and CDFW have their own guidelines. But generally speaking, if the Fish and Wildlife Service produces something, CDFW says, yeah, do that. So keep that in mind. But if U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does not have a protocol or guidelines for the species you're working on. Look into whether or not CDFW does, if it's a listed species with the state. Turns out the frog is species of concern with the state and threatened with the federal government, so we use the federal government's survey guidelines. But not all species have guidelines or protocols, so you might have to look up a generic version. So on the very left here in the white, we have a standardized protocol for surveying amphibians by Fellers and Friel. Fellers is not with us anymore, but Kathleen Friel is. It hasn't changed since they produced this in the mid-90s. It's pretty functional. It was partially the basis for some of the red-legged frog survey guidelines, but also other methods books were used. And this is one that's pretty common. This measuring and monitoring biological diversity is a good one to have on your shelf if you're not all that comfortable with English. They make it in Spanish, so no excuses here. And then if you still don't have any clue on what you should do, you can develop your own survey protocol. There's a protocol for that. And by that, I mean to say this little handbook to develop a protocol is a protocol, so you have to follow it. It's like the law. So protocol essentially means this is a legal document. And if you're going to develop one of those, you have to follow the protocol rules. I tell you, I have this little booklet and it's not going to be fun. So I wouldn't recommend it myself, but in general, if you're going to do a survey and you're not following the guidelines or a pre-prescribed protocol, you should be getting approval from one of these agencies before you do it. If you don't get approval, they can throw out your survey. So if you are still looking for a protocol and maybe you're at the Ventura office or somewhere else, you can look on their website and they have the same kind of thing. And here we have California red-legged frog from the Ventura office, but they'll have other species like tiger salamander, gnatcatcher, etc. But look up the region you're in, call the field office and ask if they have their own protocol. Just be sure you know what you're doing before you start, because you'd hate to do 8 or 10 surveys and then find out, oh, you skipped a step and now they got to start all over again. On the protocol and guidelines list, there's always going to be a decontamination protocol or guidelines as well. Often they are protocols, so you got to follow them the way they're written. Jeff and I will talk a lot about this in the field and we'll show you how to do it in the field, but I'm going to go through it as well just so you guys are exposed to it. But getting back to the survey guidelines, so this is Red-Legged Frog 2005 survey guidelines, needs to be updated because there are lots of problems in here, but generally you want to follow the guidelines by starting with reading it. Don't assume you know what it says. I've been using this for many, many years, and I often forget some of the stuff that's in it. The first thing it says is to do a site assessment and submit that to the agency. Don't go out and just do surveys. They don't want you to do that. If you do surveys first, you're going to have to start all over again. So read the whole thing. I forget how many pages, it's like 22 pages, lots of details in it, but read it and follow it. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a little bit of trouble. So what you don't want to do is just go out to a site and start dip netting around. And this is me and a few colleagues just dip netting around because it's kind of what we did on the site that I was on. But you really want to avoid this kind of stuff because you don't know if you're trampling things like larvae or egg masses or other species, turtles or who knows what, California tiger salamander, whatever. So you don't want to be doing what we're doing, although when we were doing it, it was perfectly fine. Instead, you want to stay on the bank and look around. Look around by walking, using your binoculars, survey visually, do a visual encounter essentially, before you ever enter the water, if you enter the water. Entering the water is something you can and should do in certain circumstances, but you should be doing visual encounter surveys first. And then keep in mind, because I work in the consulting world with you guys, I understand how this whole life works. You don't always get to choose how much time you get to, oops, sorry, I moved my own. My fingers are too fat here. You don't always get to choose the timing of your survey window. You don't always get to choose whether or not you do like a solo red-legged frog survey. Often you'll be told, well, go out there and see if you see any special status amphibians. And so I just throw this up here just as an example of how different the survey methods are for each of these 3 species. And I threw in turtle that doesn't have any methodology at all, just to show you, like, if you get a site that commonly, and this commonly occurs, you might have tiger salamander and red-legged frog. Their protocols, their survey guidelines are not similar at all. So all the different components might overlap in some ways, but might not in other ways. So you can't do one and assume the other is getting done. And by that, just as an example, right in the center here, season for surveys for red-legged frog is generally January 1 through September 30th. Season for tiger salamanders, generally October through May. Season, if you're in Southern California for arroyo toad, is March through July. Now, you might get a window where you can see some overlap, but for the most part, you're not getting enough overlap to just say, well, they only gave me enough funding to do, 5 surveys, so I'm going to just do my best. It doesn't work that way. With red-legged frog, you actually have to do 8. With tiger salamander, you might have to do 20. Arroyo toad, you have to do 6 or more. With some of these species, you go out at night, others you don't. Some you do hand capture, others you don't. That's why you need to read and know the guidelines or the protocols. So then jumping over to decontamination procedures, we will go through this in the field. You're going to have to know it to get a permit. If you have a permit, you know that this is written into your permit. So keep this stuff in mind. It's pretty important. If not to you personally or professionally, it's important to the agencies, and that's in the end who matters. So the general point of decontamination is to avoid pushing pathogens around that might affect amphibians, and that includes chytrid, which we just call BD now. There's a B sal in salamanders that hasn't hit California, not even hit the United States, but it's probably on its way. Ranavirus, red-legged disease, which is a bacterial infection that causes the legs of frogs to be red. Even in things like bullfrogs or yellow legs, they can have red legs. And then trematodes, we can be passing those around. And this doesn't even count things like zebra snails let's just call them invasive snails and mussels. Lots of other things can be a big problem too. So you have to keep all of those things in mind when you're moving from one site to another. So there are aquatic invasive species protocols. So you have to look those up as well and get copies of those and keep those handy and read those all the way through as well. Those might include going to the Water Resources Control Board website, but there are others. But all the way down here on the bottom, you can see control strategies for disease and wild amphibians, and it includes all the details you need for the protocol that you would be following. This is a different protocol altogether. This is one that was put out by PARC. It's the Partners for Amphibian and Reptile Conservation. It's similar to the protocol that is used by the state of California. In the general sense, most of these are very, very similar, but similar isn't always good enough. Sometimes you have to do them precisely. And it depends on the site you're going to, and some sites are very, very specific. Here's one, for example. This is a very specific protocol for decontamination from Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park, and they require you to follow this. It's a slightly different, from some of the others. And the gist of it is right here in the red box. So they prefer you use one method, and they give you an alternative method, and that is it. They don't let you say, well, how about if I do this? Well, how about if I left my waders on my deck for 2 weeks? Or how about if they don't let you do the how about if I. You have to do one or the other, and only the way they say. So, and they tend to be doing the one that is typically written into your permit. So the preferred method is to use Quat. It's a hospital grade cleaner. We use Quat 128. There's a different concentration called Quat 64. With Quat 128 at that concentration, you use about 1/4 of an ounce per gallon of water, and you swirl it around. You get your waders in there, you step out, you wait a couple of minutes, you get into a rinse solution, you swirl it around, and you get out. So the details on this, where it says note, the recommended dilution, blah, 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 is really talking about being careful, because if you increase the dilution level too much, the concentration of the quat in the water can have neurologic effects on amphibians. So you really need to follow these protocols pretty closely. And the more people you have, the more important it is, because you're bringing more of this stuff into the habitat. So this is what it looks like if you just went to the store and bought it from Smart and Final or Costco or somewhere like that, or even online. We've got ours online now. The alternative, and that's one that we use as an alternative, we don't use it as the primary, is fresh household bleach. And I highlight fresh. Fresh matters in the protocol itself. Has to be fresh, meaning you open that lid and for some reason, there's a safety seal on it. You peel that off, that's fresh bleach. If you open the lid and there's no safety seal, that's not fresh bleach. And once you've opened it, the concentration level changes and they don't want you to use it anymore. Get rid of it, get another bottle. So they don't want you to use the concentrated formulas or the scented formulas or the sudsing formulas. All those things have to be considered. And you use about 6 ounces of bleach per gallon of water. Just keep in mind that bleach is a little tough on equipment, tough on skin, tough on animals. So again, they really explicitly state don't use bleach that's either expired or used or been opened. All these things matter quite a bit. The slight advantage of bleach is that you can pour your bleach water out onto some asphalt or pavement and it'll all evaporate and everything's fine. But you don't want to do that with quat. With quat, you want to take it back to a sink or a toilet or some drain that goes to the sewage treatment plant and get rid of it in that way. So here's what you would probably buy if you went to the store. Now, if you buy the bottle that's on the left, you know the concentration level, it was in the protocol. But if you buy the crystals, which are a little more stable and easier to, say, backpack in or something, you're going to have to figure out your concentration rate, and you can calculate it, but you're going to have to do that before you use it. So typically we just use these little storage bins, especially with lots of people, so you could step in them or you could put all of your equipment in them. You want to make sure you recognize how deep you're going to go. So if you're going to go knee deep, disinfect up to your thighs. If you're going, chest deep, then disinfect all the way up. Make sure you disinfect your nets, your pails, your buckets, everything that's going to go in the water, you should be disinfecting. So here's a little bit of that kind of cautionary tale. If your bleach concentration is too high, you can see on the example on the left that the boot on the right of the left photo has been put in bleach concentration that's far too high, and it just breaks it down. But bleach is going to do this to your waders no matter what. It's just if you use the right concentration, they'll last maybe a good season or two. But if you use the wrong concentration, you may not even get into the water that day at all. Now, here's sort of one of those, roll your eyes stories where people were going to the field, they forgot their bleach, so they stopped at 7-Eleven. They don't sell bleach at 7-Eleven, but they sell Pine Sol. And the people thought, well, Pine Sol is like a bathroom cleaner. I'm sure it's going to work. It's a little like bleach or it's a little like quat. We'll just use Pine Sol. But Pine Sol dissolves the glue on your waders. It's not a good thing to put in the water either. And so it's bad for all reasons. So either use bleach or use the quat or use whatever your protocol explicitly states. There are new protocols that allow you to use alcohol, but you got to use the right concentration. You can't just go to Target and get 70% rubbing alcohol. It's just not going to work. You got to use what they say. Oh, and then we're going to slip into like minimum qualifications. This is something that's been hot on Jeff's and my kind of list of to-dos. We follow people through the progression of their workshop natural history, and we try to help people track their experience so that they can meet the minimum qualifications to get a recovery permit if that's your goal. There are minimum qualifications for some species, and in this case, red-legged frog is on that list. We don't recommend, nor does the service want you to meet the minimum qualifications. They want you to exceed the minimum qualifications. But in doing that, they want you to keep track of what you're doing in a very clear, concise, and accurate way. And I'm saying that kind of slow and sounding like I'm irritated because Jeff and I just had an interaction about this whole issue where somebody we really liked and admired did not track things very well, was not accurate with the numbers, was not precise with the dates, was just sort of mishmash pile of numbers and words on a spreadsheet and submitted that. and is likely to be denied for a permit. And we don't blame the service. You really have to be careful, cautious, accurate, precise. We can send you a spreadsheet where you can start tracking your observations, including those that start tomorrow if you're in tomorrow's group. In fact, I'll email that out to everybody today. And just track everything very precisely, which means keep track of people's permit numbers, which we'll include on our sheet that we send you. But if you plan to, or if you think you're going to plan to, or if you might plan to get a permit in the future, you should be tracking absolutely everything you handle and everybody's permit number that you work with, because everything like that is going to matter a huge amount in the future. And if you come back to them 5 years later, 10 years later, they're not going to remember you. So track it now. So the minimum qualifications are too intense to go through, one by the other, but generally you need at least 30 hours of documented field experience. And documented means with a permitted person, not under a BO, not under an HCP or an ITP or any of that. Has to be with a permitted person whose permit number you know. So you have to do that. Your experience has to include at least 3 independent surveys. You can't do 30 hours in one big, long, massively intensive survey effort one day, or I guess it would have to be 2 days. It should be at least 2 geographic locations, and we highly recommend 2 or 3 different counties with at least 2 or 3 different people. Jeff and I will repeat that over and over. You have to have handled and measured at least 2 adults or some sort of frog shape, so a juvenile of some kind, and at least 5 larvae, but it could be a mix of anything else after that. They have to be done without injury or mortality. Then you have to see at least 1 egg mass in this process. Each of these surveys you do, if you get 0, you can count up to 4 of the 30 minimum hours if you get 0, but it still has to be with somebody with a permit. 1 formal workshop, so they generally mean level 1, can count up to 4 hours, depends on the workshop. Some you only get 2 hours. But not more than 4, and that's going to include ours. Even if we're in the field 5 or 6 or 7 hours, you're going to get 4 hours credit, but you're going to get credit for all the animals you handled. And then you have to be trained to do disinfection, which we're going to do on these Tuesday meetings that you're going to encounter with us. And what I haven't included, and they've added kind of lately, is you have to know the vocalization of the frogs. So we will instruct you on how to do that as well. So here's sort of a summary of it, and I can send you this if you need to know, but you should actually be looking it up on the website so you can notice exactly what the words are that they use rather than the words that we're using. We're just simplifying it here for you. You can take a photo of this with your camera if you choose to, but you should actually look up the minimum qualifications under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website. So about this time, we thought we'd take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll get started again with Jeff. If you guys don't have any questions, we'll go ahead and take a break. I see 2 in the chat. Did you address those, Jeff? He's just doing the mime effort on us. We can't hear you speaking because you've muted yourself.
Sorry. There had been 2 and I answered them. So if there are 2 more, they're not showing up on my chat.
Okay.
I had a question real quick. Back to dispersal, you mentioned that the metamorphs will leave their natal ponds following the first substantial rain next year. Has there been any case where they were gotten big enough, or do they require a whole year essentially to be able to breed in that pond? They disperse and then come back the following year for breeding, or has there been a case where it's very productive at the pond?
That's a really good question. Some of them stay home no matter what, it seems.
Gotcha.
So some never leave, but it's a really small percentage. Most of them do leave and come back. But the other thing to consider in that is that if 3% of them survive to breed, that's a good number.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a massive mortality at all life stages until they reach adulthood, and then mortality slows down quite a lot.
Great.
I think
Keep
in mind your question kind of had a sort of a tricky bit in that, and that is that the metamorphs meaning it was a tadpole this year, and it's this in the same year it was a tadpole, it became a frog,
Yeah.
don't necessarily just leave the pond and then come back and breed the next year. Typically, at least in the history of this frog, we believed it took about 3 years for them to actually meet the morphologic requirements to be able to breed. So they would be out in the upland or moving back and forth. We're not really even sure. And then they would breed maybe in year 3.
Got it.
Now, on a project Jeff and I are working on in Napa County, it looks like some animals, given sort of a really accelerated growth rate, can have all the secondary sexual characteristics of breeding in a year. But we have not known that until this past fall, that was even possible. So
Interesting.
some of the stuff we're still learning. As we're talking to you, things are getting learned, and I mean that literally. Jeff and I are active researchers. I'm a consultant too, but Jeff's an ecologist working on a site that he does lots of different things. But lots of what he does is working with students from a university or learning stuff as we're going along here, and we're just loving how much we're learning. But it's also frustrating knowing our learning curve is still like at this angle.
Yeah.
Well, and not to go down rabbit hole too much, but what's interesting about the site in Napa County is that it's a fresh introduction. And so traditionally it's thought that males mature faster than females. And if that's the case, and we have males that grew unusually quickly and matured unusually quickly, and are ready to breed in the first season following their transition, that's an interesting thing unto itself.
Yeah.
If females take longer and there aren't any females there to breed with, kind of a moot point.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see if we get females and males alike. We don't know that yet, but we should know pretty soon. If we get both accelerated, that's a really exciting thing. And also ecologically too, because it means that they're excellent colonizers, which is something that would be very nice to know.
Sure. Yeah. Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. It looks like there are 2 new chat messages.
I think I looked at. Yeah, I did look at them, Jeff.
Sufficient first rainfall, 1/10 of an inch is what we've seen. Yeah, even
it's
so.
It's going to be Sorry, Jeff. It's going to vary by site, and it'll vary by what happened the day before too. Like if it rained a little the day before, it only takes a little more rain for them to kind of shoot out. I tell the story that I took a former friend of mine out to a site on a Sunday to see red-legged frogs, but I scouted it on a Thursday, and there were about 600 metamorphs on the Thursday. So on that Saturday it rained, and on Sunday when I got her out there was 7 frogs. So 590, frogs took off. And it's probably not that accurate, but a huge number just left the pond in one day. And it was just over a small rain event. We didn't measure how much rain it was. So if you're going to a site where you think you're going to find frogs, it's best to go before the rains start, because you don't know what exactly is going to trigger them. But when they are triggered, they move in mass and they're just gone. And that you could go to a pond and find 0, but they're still everywhere because they're up in the upland.
Yeah, and the key is the rain and rainfall. There just has to be enough. So I've seen them move on 1/10 of an inch, but not all the frogs moved. And so we also don't know if they need to attain some personal size before they leave, or are they going to stay because there's not enough rain or they're too small and then they wait for the next rain. These are all, brand new stuff that we're learning, brand spanking new stuff that we're learning. So, and also the other thing that we've been finding out is that red-legged frogs overwinter, and to the degree as tadpoles, and as tadpoles, when they decide to transition is completely up to them. And of course, we don't know what those cues are. But so that means that even in the winter, after much rain has fallen, you can still get metamorphs leaving the pond. It's just that usually there's a mass leaving with the first rain because there's a mass of them ready to leave. But it doesn't mean that they all go at once, but the majority frequently do.
So
All right.
if we're going to give you guys about a 10-minute break because we think everybody wants
Oh,
to
yeah.
get up and stretch their legs and maybe fill up their coffee. So we're going to meet back here at 10:35. So 9-minute break. So feel free to wander off and we'll be back about that time too. Doing these lectures, Jeff, I sit here listening to you and it always makes me smile because I know some of the stuff you're saying because we've talked about it so much, but I just truly love this stuff and it's just nice to have all of this information keep swirling back at us.
Me too. Well, and it takes brand new questions and fresh faces to get you thinking about it in all the ways that you can think of it also. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
really exciting is learning what it's like in other people's minds and how that connects to your own experience. That's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, and it also makes me a little bit excited for the field trips because, every time we get into the field, people have just such really interesting and intriguing questions and or somebody shows up like Park and, flashes a black light into a bucket. Just new stuff every single time. It's just
Yeah,
it's shocking how many new things can happen.
I know. Yeah, it is great. All right, well, I think I'm going to get rid of some coffee and meet you back.
Okay, I'll be back.
I have the window open and it's chilly.
Yeah, I noticed you added a coat.
Yeah.
I added a new word to my vocabulary.
Oh, what's that?
Erstwhile.
Oh,
You used that in an email to the service, and I thought, oh, I better look that up.
it's a fun one. I like it.
I think it says it's from the 1700s.
So am I.
We'll
I have
give
a
him
question.
another minute or so. Did somebody have a question?
I have a question.
Yeah. Hi, Amanda.
Hi guys. Are we going to, is this considered, I'm sorry, it's Monday morning. Can we use this training time to coincide with our field date for this workshop when we're entering information into our handling spreadsheet? That doesn't
I
make
think
sense.
it counts toward the overall. They get 4 hours for this, Jeff.
Yeah,
For the lecture and the field, you get 4 hours total.
yeah,
Where they limit us, excuse me, even if you're with us for 10 hours, you only get 4. And that's one of the things that Jeff was trying to explain earlier, is that service only for this first workshop, the service only accepts 4 hours, no matter how much time you spend over that.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that it was relevant, kind of like when we do the CTS or the rare pond survey, where we have the physical in-person classroom and our
I see.
associated field workshop, right? This is basically just a virtual version of our in-class time learning plus the field portion, which will take place on the following Tuesdays, but it will just be one entry in that row.
Yes.
Yes, because
Thank you.
ideally what you're entering is the field portion anyway. That's where your handling is, and you're really checking off the box for the lecture portion. They do require you to have a level 1 workshop if you're going to get a permit. So that's what this is mostly about. Or for some people who don't care about permits, it's for educational purposes, and that's perfectly fine. But they're not going to ask you how many hours you've been in a lecture or in a classroom. They're really going to want to know just your field portion, and they assume the box gets checked for this portion, whether it's virtual or whether it's at Laguna Foundation or wherever.
Gotcha. And do you have a, I'm sorry, I thought this was only supposed to be for 1 hour. Do you know how long we're going to go for?
Ooh, forever. Sorry, Amanda.
I need,
I think
no,
we
I need to
scheduled
get
it
on
for,
the road though.
we scheduled it for 3. We're recording it, so we'll just send it to you if you miss any part of it.
Okay.
Yeah, and that
No,
can
I'll
start
stay
right
on.
now. You stay on as long as you want, but you've also had a lot of exposure to us, so you probably heard some of this before.
It's good. It's good. Review is good. It's a lot better than sitting in a Monday morning admin meeting anyway, to be honest.
Thank goodness for that.
Okay, folks, we're going to get started here, and Jeff's going to talk about prey and predators and that sort of thing for red-legged frogs.
Okay, and I think we have my screen. Yeah, I think we're
Yeah.
good. Well, frogs, well, with anything, I guess you are what you eat, and frogs will eat pretty much anything. So there are generalists, although they eat mostly insects because that's a size and an abundance of things that are, or a class that's abundant to them so that they can eat it. But they are generally insectivorous. The caveat being that they'll eat whatever they can fit in their mouth, and that means oftentimes each other. But they're not, so frogs as adults are insectivorous, but they start out as herbivores generally. Some frogs are predators as larvae, but the ones we're studying today are algae feeders. They do occasionally cannibalize. There's a really brilliant, good-looking guy who's got a paper out on that fact that they will cannibalize one another as larvae, but that's probably not very frequent, and there are probably circumstances under which that's triggered. We don't know much about that. But adults are primarily insectivorous. They do eat small vertebrates. We have seen that. We have evidence of that. I would point you to Megan Bishop's paper on diet. Hers is probably the most complete one. We also have several notes on diet, but hers is the complete deal. When we're out in the field, we will instruct you, because we will likely be catching frogs of various sizes. We will instruct you to confine them by size. So we usually put them in buckets so we can handle them and talk about them. But we don't put the small guys in with the big guys because they become one frog when they were started out as two. And that's really bad for our permits, and it's not great for the smaller frog either. So these are the things that will tell you that cannibalism is common, and they're not bashful about it. You know, we might think that you put them in a bucket and they've just been captured and they're traumatized by that. And that may be true, but not too traumatized to eat a smaller version of themselves. So they are gate limited. And when we show you how we take measurements, one of my interests ecologically is when, at what gape, so size across the mouth, how big they can open their mouth, does that trigger when they start eating certain kinds of prey, or when they think that that prey is available to them? So gape limited, and so they jam in whatever they can. In previous studies, so Hazen tendon was probably the first one that we know of, first complete one, and they found 42 different taxa. So again, sort of telling you that biodiversity of prey is all over the place, and that anything will do pretty much that they can fit in. Here's Bishop's also, sorry, 82% terrestrial invertebrates. So that's one of the things that's interesting about that, is that we've been working on a comparative study for way too long now, which means I haven't published it yet. But comparing the diets of red-legged frogs and bullfrogs, and we're interested in that because we want to know what the impact is of bullfrogs, is where they overlap with red-legged frogs. One of the things about bullfrogs is that they take probably an equal amount of aquatic prey versus terrestrial prey, whereas red-legged frogs, mostly terrestrial prey, and that's confirmed in Bishop's study. And what's interesting about that is that it tells you the big difference between the two frogs. We always pound into you that California red-legged frogs are terrestrial frogs. You're going to hear this a lot in the field. We'll probably even be rude about it at some points, but it's a terrestrial frog. It is meant to be out in the landscape somewhere. So, and the diet reflects that. So as we say, you are what you eat, they're terrestrial, they eat terrestrial prey. Here we have one eating a crane fly. I don't know if everybody knows what that is, but when I was a kid, we called them mosquito hawks. So they look like an overgrown mosquito. They're really common in the spring, and these guys eat a lot of them, but we happened to capture one. They have super long legs. We happened to capture one, and we've done this several times where the legs are just sticking out. But one of the things about predation is that it's, no matter who's doing it, it's really hard to witness. So we look for these little hints in terms of diet when we can get them, because even a frog, we think of them as slow and clumsy, but you know, like that, and the predators or the prey is down the throat. And unless you have special permits to make them give up that prey, it's kind of hard to study them. One of the things Jeff likes to say is, if you're looking, I think, so Sam McGinnis, one of his mentors, told him that he thinks that California red-legged frogs locate ponds in the landscape or water bodies in the landscape by hearing the call of their #1 prey item, which is the tree frog. And so here you can see confirmation that yes, in fact, they eat a lot of tree frogs. I'll tell you what, bullfrogs eat a lot of tree frogs too. Poor tree frogs, everybody picks on them. But these seem to be very important for adult red-legged frogs. And it's quite a nice morsel to get. Sometimes we see extremes. So spiders are really common prey. I mean, really common prey. And when we're out at night and we're looking at frogs at night, you're going to see that there are a lot of spiders out there. One of the neat things about spiders is that, like frogs, they have reflective eye shine. Sometimes that can be tough when you're first learning how to survey is what's a frog and what's a spider. But there are lots of spiders out there on the landscape, and they move around a lot, and frogs are ambush predators. They sit in one place. So a little spider comes along, snatch they go. Sometimes they get big spiders. So this is actually a tarantula, and it was caught by a frog in a cave situation. So we don't know if the tarantula is pale because it was in a cave or because it was molting, but anyway, sometimes they get some pretty big stuff. Now, tarantulas, you probably know, also have these little microfine hairs that have barbs on them, and they shoot them at whatever's trying to eat them. So it's their defense mechanism. But the frog has grabbed the tarantula such that it can't be eaten by those, because it's grabbed the source, and now the tarantula can't flick them at them. That's what they do. They grab them with their legs and flick them like little darts. Anyway, the frog can take some pretty good size prey, and it's going to fit this in its mouth. But it also seems to have adapted a way to overcome some of the dangerous prey. And then, so also other threats to frogs, and there are many. One of the more common ones these days, unfortunately, is endoparasites, and they can cause these malformations. This one is Riberoia, and it causes them to grow extra limbs. And usually what that happens, it's not directly fatal, but oftentimes it slows them down enough to make them easily grabbable by predators. Riberoia, I'm not sure how it got spread around. It's a trematode, it's a worm. And I think there's still research going on in terms of what the source is. But a lot of the spread of it is probably through also the introduction of bullfrogs, because they spread a lot of these endoparasites in water bodies that are shared by red-legged frogs. So here's one of those. This is also spread by fish. This is the yellow grub, or yellow worm, some people call it. And on the left-hand side, the puffy thing is the inside of a lung of a bullfrog in this case. And the yellow worm almost looks opalescent, actually, to me. But those are individuals inside the cavity, and then the ones on the right have put on a glass slide. You can see the intestinal tracts and the reproductive tracts, etc. Really common. When they get in big enough numbers, they can actually kill the frog directly. Here's another one. It's a pretty common one. This is echinostoma, and it's those little sort of round, not even sure how to describe them. They look like transparent sesame seeds, I guess, inside the kidney. And there's a really interesting paper out there about how they invade the kidney, but they can also get in large enough numbers that they ruin the water balance. So they actually throw off the function of the kidneys, which is really fluid balance in the body. And so oftentimes, or not oftentimes, sometimes you'll catch a larva that looks like it's full of water or full of air. And it's usually the result of the echinostoma infection, and they've thrown off the water balance. So the larvae can't have no renal function. They don't excrete water. So they retain fluid, and it's probably fatal in the end. This one is unique in that it's also got a yellow worm at the end of the kidney here. And then this one is definitely one that's spread by bullfrogs as well. So all of these internal parasites have multiple hosts. And in this case, one of the hosts is dragonfly larvae. So when they eat the dragonfly larva, goes in the stomach, and then one of the stages escapes and then gets into the lungs. And in the lungs, the adults are formed, and then they reproduce and shed eggs into the bloodstream, and then it goes, of course, gets excreted by the frog. So that's how the cycle is made. But this is an exchange between dragonflies essentially and adult frogs. But these are out of a bullfrog, but now they are also in red-legged frogs, and we've just found them in yellow-legged frogs as well. I don't know if they're fatal. They're gross as hell, but I don't know if they're fatal. But oftentimes, the worst infection I think I've seen, and frog lung is, you could fit probably 3 of them inside my little pinky finger. But you get up to these, I think 15 or 20 of these in one lung. So they can really occlude the lung. Pretty damn gross. This is Hematolecus is the genus. And then they get all kinds of other things. Now, this is a bullfrog, and unfortunately, the researcher I gave this to said, yeah, I know what this is, and then left the country. So we think it's a fungal infection, but this bullfrog was actually alive when I collected it, and it was calling. So it was trying to reproduce. And so it was blind in both eyes, and both ears had the tympanum eaten off. So it's hard to believe that it was alive, and I don't know how much longer it would have lived, but these are things that can also happen to red-legged frogs. So keep your eyes open, and please report any unusual things that you see, because this is how researchers get an upper hand on finding a remedy to the problem, and also trying to get a handle on outbreaks. And then this is something actually that Jeff has become really interested in the last 3 or 4 years: leeches. So some leeches attach and actually get a blood meal from the frog, and others are phoretic, which means that they're just hitching a ride. There are a lot of phoretic leeches that ride along on turtles and or on insects. I think the jury is still out on whether or not these guys are getting a blood meal from the frogs, but we may find some in the field this week. And then Jeff actually has been working with a Canadian leech biologist who's identifying all the species that we have. Predators of larvae. So this is a cool one, especially since it's eating a bullfrog. But garter snakes eat a lot of frogs of any size. And in fact, showed you earlier that frogs get radios put on them, radio transmitters. We actually had a pretty big garter snake eat one of our transmitted adult frogs, and actually passed the transmitter in a fecal block. So it took them about 6 days, but it ate our frog, and then it passed the radio. Pretty well. Anyway, it is what it is, right? But this is an aquatic garter snake. This is in Santa Clara County, and it grabbed that pretty good size bullfrog tadpole, and then spun it around and took it tail first. So it grabbed it by the head, and then over time spun it around and ate it tail first. Pretty cool. Anyway, also bullfrogs themselves eat a lot of tadpoles, and they'll eat them of their own or other frog species. And then also some diving birds will take them as well. And then predators of adults. This is what are you going to do? This is a California red-legged frog being consumed by an aquatic garter snake, but snakes got to eat too. So, and we love snakes, but this is what happens to a lot of those little metamorphs, and why a lot of them don't make it. The snake population around our ponds expands right now, which is about the time the metamorphs are happening. So I'll see them the rest of the year, but then when the little guy's out, snakes everywhere. And then finally, bullfrogs will eat also the terrestrial form of frogs. And so in this case, bullfrog on the upper left, but on the right hand side, you can actually see the backbone, but there were 2 metamorph red-legged frogs inside of this bullfrog that we killed with a pellet rifle. We also killed this one with a pellet rifle. This is at a lake that's next door to where we're going to be going tomorrow. And then this is at Kellogg Creek, but that's actually, somebody mentioned subadult before. I believe the snout vent on that red-legged frog that I pulled out of this, the stomach of this, so the stomach is right here, and this guy came out of there. So this frog had just eaten, this is a female bullfrog, she had just eaten this frog, but it's about 60 millimeter snout vent, which means it could have been a reproductive age. So it gives you some idea of, she could just probably barely fit it in, but she ate it. And it happens a lot. And then sometimes they get eaten by other things. So in this case, this was the first female we ever put a radio on. She had she was near and dear to our hearts. And she came to the pond to breed. She moved 400 meters from the creek where we put a radio on her. And unfortunately, a raccoon got her. So we tried to nurse her back to health. And you can see here that she came up to spawn. She came up to lay eggs, but she never had the chance. So raccoons get their fair share too. She got away from the raccoon, but the mortal wounds ended up killing her. And then the other threats, I would say drought, big time. In this case, in this pond, this is actually from the slide I showed you earlier where the egg mass dried out. the pond completely dried out before the egg masses had a chance to hatch. So this was severe drought. Pesticides indirectly kill them and maybe even kill them directly. Human encroachment, we are the most destructive force on the landscape, period, hands down. I don't care if you like frogs or not. Habitat destruction, of course, is one of the results of human encroachment. Unless your generation intervenes and intervenes quickly, we have great hopes in you, but it's not looking good. I mean, we think this is a very recoverable frog. Don't get us wrong. We're optimistic, but also some things just have to change. Any questions?
It looks like most of the internal parasites are introduced in some other one
Not
other way. Or...
necessarily. No, that work is still being done.
Okay.
We don't know. But spread by an introduced frog.
Sure. Okay. Perfect. Thank
Yeah.
you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm going to get started here on listing and status. Jeff gets the cool topics. I get the, well, I don't want to call them names, but they're less than exciting, but still important. So we definitely are going to keep talking about this stuff. So listing and status may not mean all that much to you unless you don't know anything about it at all, but it's important to know the real facts behind it too. So the status of the red-legged frog, which initially was by subspecies, Rhina aurora drattonii, obviously now its own species, was listed by the state of California in 1994 as a species of concern. And then with time, what we saw was the state just kept it as a species of concern, but they dropped the aurora part and made it its own species, Rhina drattonii. This was based on genetic stuff that Schaefer did. So the first mention of it being a species of concern was in this book by Jennings and Hayes, which is in the orange cover in 1994. So we knew it was a species of concern then. And then later, this newer book that's a lot nicer came out in 2015, and it's still a species of concern in California, even though realistically the species probably should have been listed as threatened by the state. So we dropped the subspecies piece, we create a species out of it, and that was the only change between these two books over about a 20-year period. And then if you don't have these books, these are both available as a PDF from CDFW, and you should get them. If you can only get one, and you should be able to get both since they're PDF. If you can only get one, I would get the orange one because it has much more detailed information and cites many more people who have done the early work on the species, as opposed to the Thompson book, which is very pretty. It's a great book. I have it and I like it, but it seems like they cited their friends and family, and that's about it. So I use it. It's got a beautiful map in it, nice photos, but I still use the orange version by Jennings and Hayes much more commonly. So the federal government listed the species in 1996, and when the federal government lists the species, what they end up doing is having to put it out to the general public. So they have to put it in the Federal Register, announce that they're going to propose a species for listing, get lots of comments about it, both positive and negative. It has to go over a certain number of days. I think it's a 90-day comment period. And then they can either reject the listing or accept the listing, and the species becomes listed. But for a year, it's protected under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service while it's being proposed. So in this case, in 1996, they proposed it. It was, I think it was listed thereafter. And then when you list a species, the federal government is required to create a recovery plan. Now, few species get a recovery plan, even though it is the law that they have to do it. But this one did get a recovery plan. It had a draft recovery plan for a number of years. And then the final recovery plan, which is available as a PDF, and you should have this, it came out in 2002, and it's still a good book. It's the natural history part of it is very outdated because so much has been learned since this came out in 2002. So in 20 years, we've learned a huge amount about this frog, although we still have a lot to learn. But if you plan to get a permit, and if you've drifted off and you're texting somebody right now, you should stop and listen. If you plan to get a permit, inside this book will give you recovery actions. Those are justifications for you getting a permit. You have to use at least one of those to justify getting your permit. So get this as a PDF, look in the recovery actions list. You'll go through it and one will say, figure out the known range of the species. That's a justification. The others might, they say all kinds of things. I think there's probably about 80 of them if I remember right. So do get this little book. It's not a book, it's PDF now. I have it on paper because I like these kinds of things in paper. So then also involved in the Endangered Species Act is, okay, you list an animal, you build a recovery plan, then you have to establish critical habitat. That occurred in 2010, and if you haven't worked with critical habitat yet, generally speaking, the federal government says that there is certain habitat that they feel is critical to preserving the species. And initially, the critical habitat as proposed was vast. It was, I don't remember the number of acres, but something like 5 or 10 million acres. It was major. And then they have a public comment period, and the public commented, and many of the comments were negative because people who are going to be impacted are more likely to comment than people like you and me and Jeff, who have too many tasks to do, so we don't make any comments. So when they have more negative comments than positive comments, they act negatively toward their own critical habitat proposal, and they reduced it to something like 10% of their original proposal. So there are critical habitat areas. They're pretty important. It's important to know if you're working in them. You can look this up online as well, and they have maps online. They're not very clear maps, but they have this online. CDFW also has it in their electronic system, the CNDB. So you should know if you're working in critical habitat because it triggers lots of different things that you don't have to deal with if you're not in critical habitat. But it's just to point out that these are the steps. So you propose a listing, you list it, then you do a recovery plan, then you do a critical habitat. Lots of species don't have a critical habitat plan or a recovery plan yet. And then in this particular case, we're adding this piece in because this happened in the middle of the listing process. So it was a subspecies when it was proposed for listing and became a species when it was listed. And we almost had the same thing with the turtle, but the turtle kind of made its way to separate species before the listing, which will now actually probably occur next year. So this was the paper that Schaefer wrote that I referred to with the map and Mendocino County being broken into its little intergradation zone. So the California red-legged frog went from subspecies to species during the listing period based on this paper. And this was the genetic differentiation of really northern red-legged frog from California red-legged frog. It's an important paper to have. It also has the map that I showed you guys earlier. It's a good one. You can get it as PDF, obviously. Everything's available as PDF now. And it's one that you don't necessarily need to read, but you should look at the figures and understand the abstract. So to whittle down to the important piece of all this was they looked at all these species, and in this box on the right, we have Rana aurora, which is the northern red-legged frog, Rana cascadei, which is Cascades, Rana drattonii, Rana muscosa, and now it's split, and then Rana boylei. So, and Catesby on the bottom, but it was irrelevant. So they're trying to see the relationships, and I'll let you kind of get to the meat of it, and that is what they determined was Rana drattonii, the one we deal with, California red-legged frog, is sort of a cousin to Aurora and Cascadei. But Aurora, which was the one that seemed so similar to California red-legged frog, is actually more similar to Cascadei than it is to Drattonii, even though they're essentially indistinguishable. The interesting piece, I think, to all of this is boylei, which seems to be quite similar to red-legged frog too, is actually very distantly related. It's not really even very closely related to our California red-legged frog. But these kinds of charts are not always easy to read, so I just thought I would whittle it down to the most important pieces. So California red-legged frog, very distinctly different from Aurora, which is actually much more similar to Cascades frog. You can see that there. So Jeff did food, prey, and feeding. So I'm going to jump to permits. And permits are one of those things that either you're very interested or you don't know you should be very interested. If you're uninterested, you're in a very rare group, and that's fine too. You don't have to be interested. But to some extent, I will probably dissuade you if you don't really know or care. But if you really care, you're going to be interested in this piece. So there are 3 sections of your permit you're going to need to think about, and this is kind of showing some of the copies of mine. So Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act talks about informal consultation and how the federal government needs to deal with permitting to do projects or whatever it happens to be. Generally, it's relatively informal, and you don't necessarily need a project permit, but there's Section 7, and we call that informal consultation. Generally, we're just talking to the service about stuff. Section 7 on the formal end means that you're going to actually be doing a formal permitting process, which starts with a biological assessment when you get to the service. That's where it starts. It starts earlier in CEQA. And this is to identify all the potential hazards or potential effects, negative effects for threatened or endangered species. And this is project related. So this is Section 7, formal consultation, generally project related. You do not use your personal recovery permit in these kinds of projects, whether informal or formal, with a few exceptions. Tiger salamander, fairy shrimp, and a couple of others, you might use your permit. But with red-legged frog, you are not using your recovery permit for Section 7 actions in any way, whether formal or informal. And I know this gets into a little bit into the weeds for some of you, but others, you probably know more about this than me. Section 10 is a different section of the Endangered Species Act and allows for the preparation of a habitat conservation plan, which until Clinton came around, nobody cared about. There was no HCPs being done. Clinton came around and said, hey, why don't we start doing these HCPs written into the Endangered Species Act? And now they're getting done all of the time. And this is just another permit mechanism. This is project related. And again, you do not use your personal federal recovery permit under an HCP. The HCP is the permit. So in the previous one, Section 7, you get a BO. In this Section 10, you get an HCP. These do not relate to your recovery permit. So you should not be using your permit if an HCP or a BO has been written for your project. So Section 10 has a recovery permit section, then we call that Section 10A1A, and that's the recovery permit. That's the piece that you typically are most interested in if you're taking workshops. But again, you don't have to be, but if you are, this is that piece. And so this is issued to individuals or entities who have a scientific interest in researching the listed species, whether it be threatened or endangered. And the general plan is to build better understanding on how to best conserve, manage, or recover these protected species. So the idea really is toward recovery. It's not toward consulting, or how to make you more marketable, or get you a better raise, or whatever. And all those things can play in. But the purpose of the permit, and when you're talking to the service, this is the language you need to use, is to the recovery of the species. So to recover red-legged frog. And to recover means change it from threatened to no longer listed. So ideally you're doing some sort of involved investigation that allows the service to gain information to delist the animal. This is a recovery permit that goes to you personally or to your company. So that would be called an entity permit. So if you work for HT Harvey, they have an entity permit and there's 65 people listed on it. And you might come into their company with your own personal permit, and those two things stay separate. You do not want to be on an entity permit for red-legged frog if you want a personal permit for red-legged frog. You can't be on 2 permits for the same species at the same time. Generally, your recovery permit is not used for consulting projects. It can be under tiger salamander or fairy shrimp and a couple of others, but generally speaking, you should have an HCP or a BO that you're working under. So this section here, this portion, for recovery permits is really about you. I'm not trying to help you get your company to get a permit. I would be helping you to get you a permit if that's what you want. Let's see. Am I moving any further? So there are some exceptions, like I say, to using your permit for consulting, but you should know what those are, and you should not be talked into using your permit if your company has a project. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the field because it's a real critical thing, and people don't realize they're kind of getting dragged into something that they shouldn't. The fee for this permit is about $100. It generally takes, depending on what you're asking for and what areas you're asking for, between 3 and 6 to 8 months. Maybe 5 or 6 months is sort of normal. If you're asking for a lot of complexity, it can take a much longer time. Keep in mind that there are lots of things you're going to have to do to get a federal recovery permit, and that is do a level 1 workshop, which you guys are doing. Get those 30 hours at least, and we would prefer you get like 40 to 50. Get all the handles that are required. You'll probably get most of those today. Make sure you're collecting people's permit numbers that you're working with. You'll get hours. And there are other conditions too, and you're going to need to make sure you meet all those conditions when you apply. Let's see, hit the wrong keyboard here. Okay, so here's a copy of one of the pages on my permit, and it says list of authorized individuals, and you see there's only one name. So I have had Jeff Wilcox approved on my permit to do some specific work, but outside of Jeff, I don't put anybody on my permit. Now we'll talk about this again in the field because we do think this is really important. But if this was H.T. Harvey's permit, it would say list of authorized individuals, and there'd be 3 pages of names. That may be the route you want to take. You just want to be on an entity permit with somebody, that's fine. If you want your own, I think you should get your own. I'm married to somebody who has her own permit because I wouldn't put her on my permit. I didn't put my previous wife on my permit either. I just don't put people on my permits. I think it's too valuable to me personally to add people to my permit. And if you look at these kinds of things, you need to read your permit. And we'll tell you this again in the field over and over, because on the sheet you're looking at, it says on-site supervision. That means I'm working with individuals, is defined as supervised individual conducting activities within 3 meters. That's not very far. So we have exceptions, Jeff and I do, because we do workshops, but generally they want you to be working in a very close group. So if you're going to get a permit and let's just say you work for a company I'm not very fond of, like, let's say you're going to work for LSA. And you come in with a red-legged frog permit, and they say, "Oh, can you train these 5 people? They're all going to go out with you when you go look at frogs." You can't necessarily do that because you can't have 5 people within 3 meters of you. So you need to know what your own permit says, and we're going to say this over and over and over to you. So other permits are going to be related to the state, and that's ITP is a common one, incidental take permit. The state offers that to a project, not to a person. So that allows you to have incidental take, which means you can kill things or take out its habitat. Generally, this does not pertain to you as an individual. So you wouldn't necessarily be applying for this as an individual. You'd be applying for this through a project-related experience, like you're going to put in a solar farm. You need to get an ITP. So in case you kill spadefoot and tiger salmon and red-legged frog, etc., and you're taking out their habitat, you get approved by the state to work under this type of permit. So another kind is much more common, is like in stream bank alteration agreement. Under this kind of permit, it might have specific restrictions about maybe you're going to put in a culvert, or you're going to drain a pond and take out the fish, or whatever it happens to be. You get a lake and stream bank alteration agreement. It'll have specific wording about who can and cannot work on the project. And often it's going to say any biologist working under this agreement has to also have an SCP, and I'll get to that in a second. So this is a project, again, a project-related permit. You might be able to work under it, but often the wording is going to include an SCP, and we'll talk about that. So here's the SCP, Scientific Collecting Permit. The state offers this. It's around $450. It takes about 6 months to get to, it might take as long as a year. If it's really complex, it might take all eternity, because people like Jeff and me we both have an SCP, have renewed our permits many, many years ago and still haven't gotten a renewal back. It's been almost 2.5 years for us. Other people, it's been the same length. But if you're just starting out and you're trying to get a permit, you want to make some good choices here. This is a requirement by the state. As a consultant, you should have an SCP. If you're working under an ITP, you have to have an SCP for the most part. Lots of BOs will say you have to have an SCP. If you're caught by the game warden, you better have an SCP. That means anything you collect that's a vertebrate or invertebrate should be listed on your SCP. It's your permit, personal permit. If you have an interest in red-legged frogs or tiger salamanders or fairy shrimp or some other listed species, there are additional permits, and that's written at the bottom of this paragraph where it says the take of some animals may also require an MOU or other additional written authorization from CDFW. And that is the case. So generally, if you want, foothill yellow-legged frog, red-legged frog, whatever, you're going to also have to have an MOU, which is saying this person has an SCP and I'm giving them specific authorization to also collect threatened and endangered species. And here's the list of those species. So general use permit, the fee is higher now. But the point is that there are 2 styles of permit under an SCP. Let me go back here. So there's a general use. You'll get onto the application page for CDFW and it'll say, oh, do you want a general use SCP? And you think, yeah, of course I want to use it generally and I want to do whatever I want. Ignore the fee because it's different now, but the general use permit is not for you. It's not for consultants. It's not for biologists or researchers or ecologists or anybody like that. That's for my mother and, my neighbor, and they want to collect, 3 tree frogs and look at them and take photos. That's general use. Almost nobody gets that. You want specific use. So specific use down here is I think the fee's gone up on this one too. Specific use is any species that is listed as species of concern, threatened or endangered, federal or state. You need a specific use permit. And to amend it, it's another $100. So let's just say you put on red-legged frog, tiger salamander, fairy shrimp, because they all co-occur in some areas. And then you decide, oh my God, I also need to add spadefoot toad. It costs another $100 to do that. So you want to apply for a special use permit. Make sure you pay the initial fee is, I think it's now like $150 just to fill out the application. And then you pay the extra $300 and whatever it is after they approve it, if they approve it, when they approve it. So specific use, remember that when you get on their application, specific use. We're going to talk a lot about this in the field too, because this stuff really tends to matter and people know far too little about it, I'm afraid. So the duration of the special use and general use, and we're going to ignore the general use because nobody uses that. The specific use permit is 3 years from the date of it being offered. I don't see Jeff, so I'm going to just look at this. Do we need incidental take permit or LSAA agreement if the park wants to draft water out of a creek for a prescribed burn? Ooh, that's a good question. If they do want to draft water from a creek. So the question was, do we need an ITP or an LSAA if your site wants to draft water out of a creek for a prescribed burn? Generally, the prescribed burn will have already gone through CEQA. And Jeff does burn work here. He's nodding, thank goodness. The CEQA process should have addressed that already. And if the CEQA process gets you so far down the road that you need an ITP or an LSAA, that all should have been worked out. So you should have started the CEQA process long before you started the prescribed burn. So I would say all that's going to get covered, but it's a really good question. And
it is a good question. And my guess is that if you're trying to get that burn in this year, it's probably not going to happen with a question like that. And well, we can talk in more detail maybe during the field, but drafting water out of a creek for a prescribed fire would be normally only in an emergency situation anyway. want to be doing that as a standard practice. So, but we can talk about that.
Jeff, can you address the chat as I'm going through this?
Yeah.
Okay, so again, I'm going to just say the duration of the general use permit doesn't matter, is 3 years. Specific use is 3 years. Those things are really important because what you want to remember is it's really 2.5 years. So you get it, say you get it today. In 2.5 years, you need to start reapplying for a renewal, not in 3 years. It'll say you have to submit your renewal 30 days or 60 days in before your expiration. You do not want to wait that long. It's just going to cause you a lot of grief. 6 months in advance, start your process of renewal. So this is what you're going to do if you get on the CDFW permit portal. Here's what you're going to see. So it'll give you this little page. It has 2 sections, my profiles and my permits. So you want to go into the profile section. I'm not going to give you too much detail here, but go into the profile and fill it out. It's simple stuff. Name, address, phone number. Yeah, I want a specific use permit, a couple of other things. And then it'll give you a permit number pending, a pending permit number. So you actually have a permit number. I have one up on my bulletin board right now. That's all you have to do to get one pending. You can put that on your resume, SCP permit pending. You want to go through the rest of it too, but I'm asking you just to really do this piece. Just get started. It'll help you. You'll actually be at least 1% of the way there to getting your permit. 1% is further than 0. Then you go to the permit section. It's a whole new song and dance. The piece I'm going to tell you about this is the permit application is going to all be online. It'll give you boxes to fill out. You fill all that stuff out. But fill it out by writing it into a Microsoft Word document, copying it and pasting it into the application, and then hit save and continue, or hit save and return later, and then be ready for it to have erased everything you wrote. But you'll be okay because you've been told by me, and you'll be told by Jeff again. In the field, we'll tell you all over again. Do this on MS Word and save it. If you do not save it, we don't want to hear through email or text that all your stuff got lost and it's going to take you another 6 months to do it, because we're telling you in advance. It's happened to me. It's happened to lots of people. Do it in MS Word, do a copy and paste, and then you'll have it when they lose it all for you. So the MOU that I mentioned, so now you've gotten, let's say you filled out the application, it didn't get kicked out or erased. It actually got approved, and you asked for red-legged frog and yellow-legged frog and spade-foot toad. And now you want to go out and work because you have your SCP, but you actually still need an MOU. Now, if it didn't come automatically, and sometimes it does, you actually have to go to Laura Patterson, who is unavailable for the most part. But you have to go to somebody at CDFW that you'll have to figure out, maybe with a little help from Jeff and me, because it's a moving target that's invisible. But you still have to do it. You have to go to CDFW and get an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, which is your 3rd permit. So you have your federal permit, you have your state permit. Now you get your MOU, that's your 3rd permit. And that says, okay, for endangered, threatened, or species of concern, you can go ahead and do what you're going to do. And that really just looks like a letter, and you just keep it all together in a folder or binder or plastic box or whatever it is. And you're really supposed to carry all of these with you in the field all of the time if you're going to use them. So keep in mind, if you're going to go down the permit process, if I haven't already frightened you away from the whole thing, and it wasn't my intention, I have no intention of doing that. I'm just giving you the information. If you get a permit, there are reporting requirements. So let's just say you want to go out and collect red-legged frogs just with a dip net and you want to see what's out there. You have to submit a notice of intent to collect 90 days in advance of what you're going to do. You also have to report any take immediately. So let's just say you're taking your dip net and you club a red-legged frog and you kill it. You have to contact the service within 24 hours, or if it's a weekend, on Monday morning. And then following all that, 90 days after you've done all that, you have to submit a project report that says, here's what I collected, here's where I collected it, who's with me, who killed everything, and who who the blame goes to, that sort of stuff. You write a little report, send it to them. Then at the end of the year, by the end of the year, I mean by January 29th of every year, you write a big report that summarizes everything you've done. And that report goes to every office that you have that has jurisdiction over you. So if you want red-legged frogs statewide, you're going to have to submit that report to 5 different offices. They have an online report now. It's really kind of awkward and weird and frustrating, but you have to look that up, submit that. And if you don't, you'll be restricted from use. You can't use your red-legged frog permit if you're not submitting your reports. Sorry, I got distracted. Somebody sent me a photo of a tadpole and said, "What is this?" We get that a lot. I'll just deal with it later. There are also state permit reporting requirements. So again, you have 3 permits, right? Federal, state, and MOU. It's also state. So the state requires you to notify them within 2 weeks of doing the work. You have to submit electronically a mandatory wildlife report before 30 days, within 30 days, but you should be doing 6 months before your renewal or expiration. And this they kind of monitor very, very closely. They want to know everything you've collected. So you should be collecting notes on everything from tree frog to mosquito fish to red-legged frogs or whatever it is. All of it has to be submitted. And then every year for your MOU, you have to submit a report that says, okay, I have a state permit and I have an MOU, and on my MOU I have these 3 endangered threatened species. Here are the species of that list that I've handled, and if I accidentally handled some other ones, like, oh, I got a royal toad, I also you write that in there, and you submit that to, typically it was Laura Patterson, but we don't always know who it is these days. So there's reporting requirements, and all this happens at the end of the year, and if it doesn't happen, they will keep you from renewing your permit. And if you get kicked off that sort of smooth treadmill of reporting and renewals, you're just in no person's land. It may be years before you get your permit again. So keep up to date, keep on top of it, and keep submitting your reports. So how all this affects you, this is sort of the end of my spiel on permits and permitting. Like I say, you're required to have a specific use permit if you're going to do endangered or threatened species, and the MOU and the recovery permit. Or generally speaking, you can work under a BO or an ITP or an HCP or an NCCP. There are lots of permit mechanisms you can work under with service or department of approval. So those are the 2 major ways you can actually handle a threatened or endangered species. The other way is work under somebody else's permit, but we don't see that as the best way to go, but that's up to you. In any case, we're probably going to see your name again, whether you get an SCP, an MOU, or a federal recovery permit, or you're trying to get service or department approval. Those agencies contact Jeff and me quite frequently. It's a lot of our time trying to approve people who we know have been with us in the field, either on our research projects or with us on workshops or trips or whatever. And they say, did this person really see this number? Did this person, really handle this number? Do you feel confident that they can identify things or know the vocalizations? They ask us all these questions. So despite the fact that we have 37 in our group at this minute, seems to fluctuate between 36 and 40, we may see your name again. So it's not a bad idea to spend some time with us in the field and make sure we remember your name. We have lots of people to remember right now, but being memorable is a good thing because it'll be easier for us to help you get approval when that day comes. And then just remember, there are roles and responsibilities for permit holders that are beyond you when you're just, sauntering around without a permit, without the knowledge you need it, and you're just, hanging out with people, and you're like, oh, that big yellow piece of machine didn't run over any spadefoot. I don't think there's a bird nest that's being impacted. That's consulting level responsibility. Throw your hands in the air, roll your eyes, go eat pizza in your car. That's consulting. But when you get a permit, those responsibilities change very drastically. So you're expected to read and know the limitations of your permit. Jeff will tell you a little story in the field. We find it very informative and helpful for you to listen. That's a good story to hear. There is a big change that is called the knowingly standard. So now you meet the knowingly standard. Did you knowingly see an animal be killed and not report it? Did you knowingly allow somebody to work under your permit without notifying the agencies? You automatically hit the knowingly standard. You can't deny it anymore. You're responsible. Then the other issue is that you have to accept and are held responsible for take. So you can't say, oh, it was my little brother who did it. It was my colleague who I didn't approve to work under my permit. And none of the excuses matter anymore. You're the responsible person. If you have a permit, they will come to you. If you're even on a construction site and you're the permit holder, they're going to come to you, even if you weren't part of the monitoring. You are held to a different standard, and the take often is applied to you unless you're working under a BO or HCP. And then you're expected to enforce the conditions of your permit. That means read the thing. So that was the first thing I said. And then know what those things are. So you might be expected to rat out your company or your client because they're violating the conditions of your permit. And if you don't and somebody else does, you will lose your permit for 10 years. And people like me or Jeff or others that I work with are happy to rat people out, not because it reduces competition, because it doesn't. There are enough people out there for the work to go around, but because we have to keep the standard high. So if you plan to get a permit, plan to be kept to a higher standard, because most of us aren't messing around anymore. Because if we don't rat you out and somebody says we were there, we're going to lose our permit just because we didn't even report you to the service. So the responsibility is really called professional responsibility. This is beyond the consulting responsibility level. Now you're treated as a professional. This isn't anything exceptional or unreasonable. You're just treated as a professional, and you're expected to deal with this stuff as a professional. So I'm going to do habitats, but I think Jeff's going to jump into something, aren't you, Jeff? He's going to just mime his way through.
Yeah, no, I don't. Sorry, I've kind of lost track of where we are.
You did predators and prey.
Yeah.
Do you have a section after that? You did also internal parasites.
Yeah, and threats. I seem to have habitats on my screen, but I won't know until I share there we go. So I think I need the screen back in order to find out.
Oh yeah, I should do that. Sorry.
All right. Now let me see.
We're
if I
supposed to
can
be professional here.
Yeah, fat chance. Okay, so drought pesticides. That's all I have on my.
Okay,
slide.
I think the way we were going to do it was separate out parasites and then take that after, but
Oh, okay.
that's okay. We just did a little jump. I'll go back and do the habitats, and I think that will finish us off.
It must, because I don't have it on my screen
Yeah.
at all.
Okay, you can go ahead and stop sharing, and I'll jump in.
Okay. Thank you.
Any questions while we're jumping over to habitat? Lucky us. Nobody's questioning our word. Okay, I'm going to talk about habitats. I start off with this photo of this frog on dirt, not in water, on purpose, just to remind you that every habitat slide I have will probably have an aquatic habitat feature of some sort, a pond, a creek, or whatever, but it's also going to have surrounding uplands, and we want you to know and believe and drill into your own head that this frog uses the uplands a lot, and we will talk a lot about this in the field. And Jeff, you can feel free to jump in anytime.
Thank you.
So obviously a stock pond looks like good red-legged frog habitat, and it is, but look at all the surrounding habitat. We know the frogs move up into the habitat. Jeff's doing lots and lots of work on this on his site, and we'll talk about it when we're there. But remember, the frogs can be out there in this dead, dry grass in the middle of summer just in the uplands. It's part of their natural history. They can do it even when there's water present. They don't always wait till the water dries out. So another habitat type that we know they use, this is Ledson Marsh, Dave Cook, my old friend Dave Cook's master's thesis site. He used this to differentiate microhabitat characteristics between bullfrogs and redlegs in a marsh setting. It's not a typical habitat, but they're certainly here. The problem with habitats like this is they're super hard to survey in. So lots of them get like, you throw your hands in the air and say, no, I didn't see anything. And you move on. But they're probably there. You probably should have gone at night, maybe during a rain event. Who wants to do that? But that's what you got to do. Put on your waders, walk right through all the veg, look for things that are hopping around inside the veg. Coastal creeks are common habitats for this species, and again, all the upland surrounding both directions. Just because they're flowing doesn't mean red-legged frogs aren't going to use them. Yes, they like slower water, warmer water, but they can find pools and eddies and these little pockets that they use. And during high flows, they just get out of the water and they use the upland to avoid the big flash flows. Creeks in the Sierra foothills are similar, but a little bit different because they tend to dry sooner, but that doesn't mean that they don't support red-legged frogs. They'll be in the isolated pools for much of the year, and then when they finally dry out, the frogs just go into whatever upland habitat or microhabitat they want, which includes rock outcrops, leaf litter, fallen trees, burrows. Jeff can add to that, but lots of little microhabitat. And we'll talk about and reinforce this in the field.
Sorry, I was distracted. Did you mention springs and spring boxes?
No, but I will. It's on my list. Here's a pond that we take people to on our level 2 red-legged frog workshop. It's in the Sierras at 3,200 feet. Definitely use ponds. If ponds are present, they're going to use them. If ponds are not present, they're going to use whatever's there, which might be a ditch or a creek or just pools in a creek. We found them in people's swimming pools. Most recently, some folks from Burleson found them in agricultural ditches. So even those kind of slimy, algae-filled, super warm, nasty pools you wouldn't walk into because they're next to somebody's field that they're farming, red-legged frogs are breeding in those too. And here's one of those. So this is one in the Central Valley. Despite the fact that people say the frogs don't occur in the Central Valley, they do. So this is actually the floor of the Central Valley, and red-legged frogs are present. They don't necessarily occur commonly in the Sacramento Valley. Historically, they were quite common in the San Joaquin Valley. We still see them in the valley floor, and we definitely see them in the watershed that supports the Central Valley. Created wetlands are another site that are commonly used. So there's a creek behind this created wetland, and there were red-legged frogs present, and they built 5 ponds that look just like the one you see. And they built those in October of a given year. And by December of that same year, the frogs were breeding in the pond. So they just colonized it by moving up over the upland, getting into the created pond, and it has been occupied ever since. And that was 1998, I believe. So perennial versus ephemeral creeks, it doesn't seem to matter too much. This creek was actually an ephemeral creek before the beavers moved in, and then they turned it into a perennial creek. Red-legged frogs were present in both situations. And then speaking specifically about beavers, beavers seem to create really good red-legged frog habitat, including in the dam itself. So we found that red-legged frogs use the dam and all those twigs and little interstices as refuge sites. And certainly they use the big pool sitting behind the dam as a breeding site and refuge site. And certainly they forage all around in the uplands on the dam and adjacent to the water, in the water, etc. And then ephemeral ponds, often in the consulting world, which I say often or over and over, I work in, so I get how it works. People will drive up to a pond and see that it's drying or dry, and like the middle of June, and it's drying down. They're like, oh, frogs need a pond that's going to last until August. So that must not be habitat, and they drive away, say no habitat present, which is not true because they only need to breed once every 10 or 12 years. They could live almost to 20 years. So just because it dried this year doesn't mean anything. They're just going to move into the uplands and wait it out. wait till next year and breed next year. So a drying pond doesn't mean anything. It just means you got to look in the uplands or in the cracks in the bottom of the pond instead of where it's wet. Here's Abbot's Lagoon. We talked about this where our group will be standing on, well, we actually go to this very site and you could stand on the edge of this lagoon, which is brackish. The ocean is behind you and you could be looking at red-legged frogs. So by brackish, I mean it is truly brackish. If you taste the water, it tastes salty. So keep that in mind. Brackish water does not eliminate or even limit red-legged frogs. And if you make it to our advanced level red-legged frog workshop, you'll come to this site and understand why. And then sand dune pools. This is a kind of pond that was just created overnight, and by that I mean literally. My wife and I were working on monitoring invasive vegetation removal in these sand dunes, and they would dig a big hole to pull the invasive vegetation out. Overnight, it would fill with water, and we would find red-legged frogs in it, which meant the red-legged frogs were in the upland. And when they dug the hole and the water filled overnight, the frogs just came to the pool. So that really shows you they're just in the uplands moving around. This is on the coast, so it's relatively moist at night, so they can move around at will, and they do. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't mean a permanent pool is frog habitat. Any pool is frog habitat. And then we show you this because this is in Baja California, where we're essentially in the middle of desert, and there's a little perennial creek running through it, and there are red-legged frogs breeding in this creek regularly. In fact, like excessively. They're really, really common in this area. And then I kind of show this as an example because this is a pond that I found red-legged frogs in. And then if you step away, the pond is in the center of this red box, but it's adjacent to a reservoir that has lots of fish, invasive species like striped bass, largemouth bass, big catfish, and all that. And people say, well, there are no red-legged frogs in the reservoir, but they might be in the pond. And you go to the pond, and indeed you'll find red-legged frogs. But if you walk down to the reservoir, you'll find red-legged frogs there too. And they just move back and forth depending on how much pressure they're getting from predatory fishes or whether or not the little pond is dry. Just because there are fish present or bullfrogs present or crayfish present doesn't mean you should say no red-legged frogs. We say go to that specific site, see what the conditions are, and determine whether they are present or not based on that site and your visits there. So again, we want to emphasize the habitat surrounding the aquatic features. This is that Baja site, and if you turned around from the creek and look outward, it's really, we call it desert when we're down there, but it's chaparral, but super dry, super hot in the summer, like oppressively hot where they're doing workshops in the summer. But there are frogs in the upland because they're moving between ponds that we've constructed in this habitat and the creek itself. We didn't plant them or move them. They were found in the creek. We built some ponds off the creek, and the next year we come back and there are frogs in the pond. So they're moving through this upland habitat with regularity and quite easily. They just move quite easily through this habitat because there's not a lot of grass and they can just push right on through underneath this little understory. And then again, I'm talking about upland habitat here, so non-aquatic habitat. This is Kellogg Creek, which Jeff and I have done numerous studies on red-legged frogs, pond turtles, and other things here. And there are lots of frogs in the creek, but there are lots of frogs in the upland too. This creek dries every single year. And the frogs just move out into the upland and find ground squirrel burrows or a fallen log or maybe another pool or creek further up or down the streamline. So frogs move quite a bit, and we'll talk about that when they're in their field. And here's that same site. So this is the dirt on the ground level of the same Kellogg Creek, and the arrows are pointing to the uplands because that's where the frogs are when the creek is dry. They just move into the uplands somewhere. And that typically in this particular case is ground squirrel burrows, but can mean anything, rocks, a building, anything like that. And then this same sort of this site is 20,000 acres, so there's lots of different microhabitats. There are these spring boxes up on this site, and also on Jeff's site, we could show you some, where the rancher found a little sort of a leaky spot in the hill, and they dig a hole and put a box in there, and water kind of percolates up, and it becomes a site where they can drain that water off to a trough and help water cattle or other livestock. But these boxes end up supporting a little pool within the box, and if you look in them, you'll see, at least in this case, there were red-legged frog eggs. They were attached to the edge of the box. We frequently find frogs in these. We find tadpoles in some. Jeff and I wrote a little paper on Springbok's use of red-legged frogs because it seems to be much more common than I think people have recognized. So we want you to look around in every habitat, particularly in the uplands, and look around to see where they might be found. They're not just found in aquatic features, but certainly the aquatic features attract them. So that's the end of my habitat talk. I'm going to stop sharing here and just kind of open it up. We have about 15 minutes left in our proposed meeting window, but you need not ask your questions now. You can wait for the field. You can send us emails. If you have my cell number, you can send me a text. I don't mind any of that. I'll address this tadpole question here as soon as we're done. But we want to reiterate, we gave you 3 hours of information. It's more than Jeff and I would, I mean, I can follow it because we've done it a few times, but it's a ton of information. And I rely on Jeff to have half of that information. So, you know, we rely on each other to hold bits of it. We know you're not going to hold it all. So feel free to ask questions, even if you know we talked about that topic, or we, you know, had a slide or a whole section on it. Doesn't matter. Just ask us anyway. It's perfectly fine. There are sort of, you hear this in school from some professors, there are no dumb questions. It's true, because when Jeff and I are out in the field, we look at each other and we ask each other what would seemingly be a dumb question, like, have you seen that before? Oh, there are so many times we've turned that into a published paper that we end up feeling like, you know, it's a common thing now. It's not an uncommon thing. So we want you to feel free to ask questions, especially about permitting. We know that's complex. We probably kind of messed you up with the permit topic. It's not a problem. It was sort of by design, because we want you to ask questions before you start so that you know what you're up against rather than just being sort of trapped in that spot. Jeff, you want to give any information before we give a little bit of information about the field trip?
Don't think I have anything. I'm as interested in the field trip. I mean, just getting feedback for who's going to be overnight. Do I have any vegans? Do I have any, what do you call it, gluten-free people, or people who need to be gluten-free, those kinds of things. And then also any questions about the venue, camping, you know, what the facilities are, et cetera. So, but Jeff, I'm not sure how much of that you've given out yet. So.
Yeah, so let me start by saying everybody filled out a form to register, and you said on your form, I can find my own accommodations, or I would prefer camping on site. If you changed your mind and you're not going to camp, or you are going to camp, and you haven't let us know, that would probably be the most important information right now. So right now I have everybody's form. So everybody coming tomorrow, I can look through the list and say, yeah, we have 9 campers or whatever it is. If you're changing your plan for tomorrow or the following 2 Tuesdays, and we need to know that, it would be helpful, because Jeff buys food based on how many people are going to have breakfast. And breakfast, by the way, is a good breakfast. It's not, you know, it's not like you're going to the Holiday Inn and you get a bagel and some coffee and you have to wander off. Typically, it's bacon, eggs, biscuits, pancakes, lots of fruit, weird salsas I would never touch, and some juice, coffee. You know, we try to provide a big hearty breakfast for those who stay, because not everybody will stay. And for those who do, you know, they kind of get us for a few more minutes, really a few more hours, but you don't have to stay. And you can stay off site and go eat at Denny's if you want to. It's all up to you. But I will assume that you're going to show, if you said you were going to camp, you're going to still camp unless you just send me an email. It's easier than having like 41 voices or sending a bunch of things in the chat, which is already happening. So, okay.
So sorry,
Yeah.
does everybody know where the site is?
Yeah, so we should have given you directions to Petaluma. We're going to be meeting at the Safeway. And then I will escort everybody up. Jeff will already be up there. It has a wet toilet, so a flushing toilet. Does it have Wi-Fi anymore, Jeff?
Hopefully at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's an iffy one. We will have disinfection station set up. So if you brought your stuff and it's clean, great. If it's not, it's probably still going to disinfect it. Just so you guys know, Zach sent me a chat message that says he's no longer camping. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if you have a flashlight, you should bring it. If you have waders, you definitely should bring those because we'll be in a pond and a creek. We'll typically go until about 10:30. If you're camping, we often just give you time to set up your stuff before we even go out. It's not a high intensity event at all. We really just want you guys to get as much experience and exposure as you can. We will be dip netting, so keep that in mind. If you bring a net, we're going to disinfect your net too. We should see lots of different species here, although there's no guarantees, but often yellow leg along with red leg. Anything else, Jeff?
Turtles usually.
Turtles,
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, there was a question, can they set up prior to the workshop? We usually set up between visits to the site because we do a day visit and then we do a night visit. In between, we have a meal, usually in the evening. So, and then I assume people are bringing their dinners.
Yes, yes. So we say bring lunch or dinner, whatever you want to call it, but you should be bringing food with you for the night meal, not for the breakfast meal, unless you have very specific dietary limitations.
Or you can
Sorry.
just let me know and I can prepare as such.
Yes, if you if you have a dietary restriction that's going to cause us to be surprised, send me an email real quick and I'll make sure Jeff knows that. I'm getting
sorry.
emails and texts while we're doing this.
I'll do the text part. But anyway, where was I? Oh, so what normally happens is that we meet on site, we disinfect, we introduce, have a couple of discussions, we go to the first site. And then when we're finished at that site, we come back and have dinner. And it's at that time when we break for dinner, normally we set up camp. And so if you're pitching a tent, we have a big yard you can sleep in. You can sleep on the porch if you want to. And then we go back out to the night site. And then of course, when we come back in from then, if you're staying, then you stay in your tent. If you don't, then that's when you leave for home. And then breakfast is 7 a.m. the next day.
Yeah, I know a couple of people wanted to leave early. I mean, we do the best we can to get it done, and sometimes we just give you something for the road and send you off.
Yeah.
So we will be happy to talk about all these topics again when we're in the field, or we do a little intro. We'll talk about it again. We'll definitely focus on and probably restate almost everything about the permits, and then be prepared with a camera. So you want to take photos of things. I'll send out the spreadsheet that you guys should be kind of using as a tracking method for your species handling. A few of you, like Amanda and Adrian, have already gotten this and seen it 100 times already, but I'm going to send it to everybody anyway. Just ignore it if you already have it. But start tracking everything you have. And we'll talk a little bit about your previous experience, if you've done it with a permitted person and how you get their permit number, all that, either this Tuesday, next Tuesday, or the third Tuesday in July, whichever one you're set for.
Just the meeting time in Petaluma?
I think it was 3.
That's what I thought too. Yeah.
Yeah. And then just a quick reminder, it's probably not going to be possible to switch you around between the Tuesdays. We always get asked that question. But just keep in mind that it's just not going to work. So if you can keep your day, great. If you can't keep your day, then you'll miss the field portion. Nobody's asking questions. We're just answering questions we think are would likely be asked.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In relation to like the spring boxes, will red-legged frogs also use like the concrete like cow troughs that are out in fields?
Yeah, you know, Jeff has a great photo of tiger salamanders using one, and we know that the red-legged frogs, if they can get into it, will use stuff like that. We have certainly even seen like agricultural ponds and vineyard ponds that are concrete lined that they get into, and they might even be stuck in there. So we don't negate any of that as potential habitat or possible habitat or occupied habitat. Even little sort of problematic sites where frogs kind of get entrapped. This will happen a lot, especially in concrete structures. And if you've gone to the San Luis Obispo, I forget the whole name of some weird long name like semi-aquatic herpetofauna blah 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 workshop, we take you to a former trout farm that has only concrete ponds, and they're filled with red-legged frogs, and they're completely lined by concrete and have concrete edges and almost no upland, and the frogs just exist there. So they don't understand concrete.
No, and there's also like a 6-foot in diameter cistern at the Golden Gate Recreation Area, and they live in that.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, Jeff and I, we side on the side of they occur in everything everywhere.
Yeah, just because you don't see them at any given moment doesn't mean that they're not there. In fact, the opposite is kind of true.
I agree. Jeff and I are rarely surprised anymore because we're more willing to say, "Oh yeah, they're probably there," than I mean, I don't ever say there's no chance. I say there's a pretty slim chance, but it takes a lot. I'd have to be, you know, in the Bay Area, in the internal ring where all the people are, and there would have to be fish, bullfrogs, and crayfish. And I'd say probably not likely, but still possible.
Yep. And if you see them in there, it's habitat.
Yep.
If a frog's
I have
using
a
it
quick
voluntarily-
question.
Yeah.
Hi. So if you were to design a trough and you wanted to prevent entrapment, for example, what are their mobility limitations? So how high do they jump, for example, and what can they get into? What would prevent an animal from getting entrapped? Sort of the engineering aspect.
Right. I'm not quite concerned. I mean, I'm not sure you'd be concerned about them being trapped because whatever they can climb into, they could easily climb out of.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, if you want to keep them out for other reasons, then I would suppose that you would have to probably build something like a silt fence that actually curls over at the top to keep them out, because they're really excellent climbers and they can climb that stuff and just go over. But if you build in a curve like that, then it's a lot harder for them to get over. But I'm just trying to think, and not to, I think it's a legitimate question. I'm just trying to think of why you would want to keep them out or be concerned that they'd be trapped in if they got in there themselves.
I'm thinking more about their mobility and what they're able to climb into, materials that they can climb up. I'm just not aware of how high they can either jump or what their abilities are with regard to climbing. So I wasn't even aware that they could climb, to be honest with you. So anything that you can say about their ability to move into things and materials would be great. Thank you.
They're excellent climbers. Jeff can add more to this than I can, but they are excellent climbers.
Yeah, I don't even, if there's a word above excellent, that's what they are. They're superb climbers. These are, if they were in the tropics, they would be thought of as arboreal. They're really good. They can climb up a fence that's 90 degrees, no problem at all. They climb up trees, rocks, slopes, and none of that is a restriction. I would say, though, in general, the frog doesn't have a strong push to try to get into a trough that's, you know, sitting on a concrete pad. So if there's a concrete pad and it's not going to sink, and you have a concrete trough that's whatever they are, 30 inches or something, there's not a strong push for them to try to jump up into that. But once they get in, it's easier for them to get out than to get in. But they can climb up stuff. I mean, the only better climber in our world besides tree frogs, we just rule them out, would be yellow-legged frog, which just climbs straight up a concrete wall that we saw. So Jeff and I would always think, whatever you build, they'll probably climb into it.
Yeah, if they need in, they'll get in.
The only downside we've seen is like swimming pools where they can't seem to get out because there's actually an overhang if the water's here. In swimming pools there's often an overhang and they can't seem to get out of that. So they end up drowning in swimming pools. But that would be where I would be concerned. With troughs, if they got in, I'm pretty sure they could get out pretty easily.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say, just to add kind of anecdotally, in Copeland Creek, which runs through the property you'll be on, there's a pool in the creek that we call Frog Butt Pool. Because one night when we were out, happened to look up in a tree, and about 30 feet up, we saw the butt of a frog because it was perched on a limb off the bole of a big bay tree, but just off the limb. And all we could see was its backside. And it was a red-legged frog, about 30 feet off the ground. So that gives you some idea. Why it was up there, I have no clue.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, we do see the time is coming to an end for us, and we know that people have to do lunch and get to the field and do travel and lots of things. So we do want to let you go, but do ask us questions. We're here for you, not for us. Jeff and I will vacation together and talk about all this on our own. But for you guys, we're available, even if it's a consulting project question, bring your photos or your map or whatever. Just come with questions, because this should be a time when you take advantage of having access to us. Although we will later say, you have our email, you can have our cell phone number, you can send us photos and ask questions. It's never going to be a problem. But until then, we'll see you guys in the field. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you so
See
much.
you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
See you, Jeff.
See ya.
See you tomorrow.